Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for making the trip out here and joining us for this session. My name's Misty Crosby. I'm the Director of External Relations for the Voinovich School. And with that, we also have a commitment to the service to the region. And so I also serve as the Executive Director for the Mayor's Partnership for Progress, which you will learn more about that later today on one of our panels. So I won't go into details. I'm going to start off first. If you are an elected official, raise your hand in this room. Okay, awesome. Now leave your hands up. If you're someone who works for or works in the office of an elected official, raise your hands. Awesome. Okay, leave them up. Last question. Who is excited to be in an in-person meeting? Yay, okay, we got everybody. Awesome. Yes, I'm just as excited as everybody else. So welcome, and thank you for making the trip to this beautiful lodge at Hawking College that's recently been renovated. So we thank them for hosting us. Okay, so I just want to remind you, we do have virtual participants. We have about 60 people in the virtual room. And so I'm going to remind them, we are going to be checking the chat all day. So by all means, put your questions, problems in there, and we'll be monitoring that. I think we have about 100 people in the room today. So that's exciting. I will draw your attention to the QR codes on your tables. The thing in the middle of the table, there's a QR code on it. If you scan that, that will take you directly to the website that gives you all of our speaker bios, the agenda, and the PowerPoints. So even when you go home today, you can check that again to get information. And the folks in the virtual room, you can just go to the website where you registered and you'll find all that information. Okay, I want to draw your attention real quick and say a special thanks to our partners that put this together. So that includes, and if you don't know these people yet, you're going to know them by the end of the day. So that's the good part of being here. The Governor's Office of Appalachia, John Kerry, thank you for your partnership. Misty Crosby with the Buckeye Hills Regional Council, thank you. Kathy Zook with Eastgate. Jeanette is not here yet. Hopefully she's on her way. Jeanette with Omega, and John Hemmings with OVRDC. So by the end of the day, hopefully you have contact information for all of those people. And then real quick, I'll say a special thanks to folks. Mackenzie, raise your hand. Thanks for all of your hard work. Elkin, thank you very much for all the technology that you're setting up. And then we have Rebecca and Emily in the back room. Raise your hand. Thank you so much for all of your hard work putting this together. It came together very quickly. Okay, Wi-Fi, you'll notice that you can connect to Wi-Fi. It's Hawking Guest. There is no password required. Just scroll all the way down, click the accept button, and you'll be in. So that shouldn't be hard for everybody. There is a resource table over here to the right, and it has materials for all those local development districts that I just mentioned, and also several other partners in the region that you want to make sure you touch base with that before you leave. And I think that pretty much hits on all the important stuff for the day. So now I have the pleasure of turning this over to my boss, the Dean of the Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Service at Ohio University, and he's going to offer a couple words.
Thank you very much, Amista. Welcome today. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. And also, I'm very happy to be here in person. It's like the third or fourth meeting that I've been able to go to. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to say just a few quick words about the Voinovich School, and then I'll make a quick welcome, and then we'll move into the next stage of the program. The Voinovich School is at Ohio University. It's a public-private partnership that operates as a college. We work with business, we work with nonprofits, and we work with many local different types of governments, which is the focus today. We also work on issues. We work on like water quality. We've done that increasingly with the development districts and the Governor's Office of Appalachia. We work on issues like children and families and prevention, tremendous issues facing our state and the region. And we work with many community partnerships in terms of economic and community development, and some of multiple business programs, which our largest partner being the Ohio Department of Development, where we work with a lot of programs. Amista mentioned that she has two roles that I know of. One is the Director of External Relations for the Voinovich School, and another one is the Executive Director for the Mayor's Partnership for Progress, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary, and it includes 18 counties and almost 72. How many? 120. 72 is the other. Okay, 72 is the Morpsey, sorry. 120 different villages and about 750,000 people. Amista's taken that leadership, and we've dramatically expanded what we've been doing with the Mayor's Partnership and working with local governments through our partnership with the folks today. So this program is an attempt to expand what we're doing with local governments. But the purpose of the program and what we're doing is to continue to move our region Appalachian forward. So we're really thrilled to be co-hosting with this today, and we're glad that you're here today and hope this is a really enjoyable program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark, for hosting today. Thanks, Amista, for pulling this all together. My name's Tom Johnson. I'm mayor of the small town of Somerset in Perry County. I also am an executive in residence with Ohio University. And I'm really excited to see the people in the room today. The show of hands for local government officials from Appalachia was remarkable. And the creative partners that are here today that have the capacity to help local governments move forward and take advantage of community development opportunities is pretty impressive too. So a lot of these people I've worked with as mayor for 10 years, and we've been able to do some great projects. The goal really is for everyone to understand that we've never had the amount of funding that's available to our region that we do right now. And it's going to be exciting for you guys to hear directly from the different regional players what the opportunities are. And the goal really is for us to be able to compete as a region, working together, looking at ways to come up with regional projects to do things we've never been able to do in water and sewer, address disparities in health, and do some great community projects. So I'm excited, and hopefully you'll leave today knowing people that you haven't met before, being inspired about some of the great things that are happening, that can happen in terms of community development, and really turning it into a call to action for all of us to bring home resources to our communities. So with that, I'll turn it back to Amista. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mayor Johnson. Hi, Director Mahalik. Okay, I'm actually going to turn the stage over to a former legislator in both the Senate and the House, importantly an OU Bobcat. But now the best position you need to know is that he's the director of the Governor's Office of Appalachia, John Kerry.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great day to be at the Lodge at Hocking College, and it's exciting to see all these enthusiastic folks trying to make Appalachia better. So it's my privilege to introduce Director Mahalik. Director Mahalik was appointed by the governor in 2019. She is a former mayor, former local official. She knows how to get things done. The governor has tasked her with everything from rolling out federal aid for PPE to the recent House Bill 168 funds for Ohio Builds, and she just does a great job. I have to mention one more thing before I give it up. Her focus on our region has been fantastic, and we just are very lucky to have her in this position. Tourism is one thing that she's really focused on and put resources from the department outside of our office into doing. So let's welcome Director Mahalik.
Thank you very much, Director Kerry. I have to say, while I was one of many folks, and I say this consistently every time I get to come to the region, But while I was one of many folks who were appointed by Governor DeWine to serve in this administration, I still believe that John Kerry was the best appointment that Governor DeWine made. And that is because this administration is committed to ensuring the success of this region. And I can think of no better person to lead the governor's office of Appalachia than John Kerry. You have the experience, you have the dedication and the passion. You've got a great heart, and you have a very open ear, and you listen to what the folks in leadership have to say here, and you're very action oriented. And we at Development are very proud to have you a part of our team. So thank you very much for your work and for continuing to do great things. Look, we are happy to be with all of you today and excited about what the future holds. And quite frankly, very pleased with what has happened to date. Ohio's economy is very strong. The state of the region is very strong. I'm very excited about what's happening not only in Ohio, but what is happening here in the region. The economy is on the right path, and I'm very optimistic, quite frankly, very optimistic about where we're going. In my duty as Director of Development, I have the pleasure of chairing the Tax Credit Authority. We've had a really full plate as of late, and quite a few projects here in the region. Engineered profiles down in Lawrence County, 55 new jobs there in Hamilton Township. Rural King Supply in Pike County, 200 new jobs there. Candlelight in Highland County, Winesburg Chair Company in Holmes County. And along with all of those investments, the pipeline is overflowing with opportunity. And I can't think of a better time to be in this role than right now. And really a lot of that goes in thanks to all of you. You are helping to create this environment that is conducive for investment, and it's only going to get better with all of the resources that we have at our fingertips and this collaboration that's going to consistently come together, and life is good, quite frankly. A couple of weeks ago, Governor DeWine announced the Ohio Builds initiative. A lot of you are going to be able to take advantage of this initiative. It's very focused on improving broadband and utilities and infrastructure, all in the sake of local development, something that's very near and dear to my heart as a recovering local official. It's about building up communities. It's about building out our economy and building on the resources that Ohioans need to be able to thrive. It's focused on broadband expansion. It's focused on brownfield redevelopment. It's focused on removing blighted buildings from our communities, specifically on our main streets. And it's about water and wastewater infrastructure funding, which we've done quite a bit of announcements in the last couple of weeks. And I can commit to you that we're only going to do more. And this governor is very committed to deploying the money that we've been given by the General Assembly to date. And we're not going to stop there, because we know that there are a lot of really great projects across this state that need to get done. And that's going to take more resources. And we need to make sure that we get those projects funded, because it helps ease that financial burden on the people that call Ohio home in those communities. We announced the first 2 rounds of water and wastewater grants as part of Ohio Builds, $137 million of the $250 million to date to support projects in all 88 counties. I'm very proud to say we're going to be making more announcements in the coming weeks. The events that we've done so far have been great. We all know water and wastewater is not sexy, but it's incredibly vital to the things that are important to us. So stand by. We're going to be doing a lot more, and we're going to be doing that together. It's kind of a theme of this administration, if you haven't figured that out yet. Broadband grants were due today. I think they close up here at 5 o'clock. And the residential broadband grant program, I know Peter and the team at Broadband Ohio is looking forward to processing those and getting those dollars out the door as quickly as we can. Of course, not quickly enough if you were to ask Lieutenant Governor Husted. But both the governor and lieutenant governor are determined to expand broadband access across the state of Ohio, especially here in the Appalachian region. And we're going to need to work with you in order to get that done. We know how important it is, not only for our businesses, but for our communities to have access to reliable high-speed internet. And we're going to work with each of you to find the right solution for each community. Recently, I joined Lieutenant Governor Husted in launching a new Marks Tower pilot project over in Washington County. We, of course, have been working with Switzerland local schools in Monroe County and the Muskingum Valley Educational Service Center for telehealth projects. And we're going to do so much more. And we're looking forward to getting that done. I want to be mindful of the time that we have here together because I know Misty's got really a full plate for you this morning and moving forward. But look, in the coming months, we're going to launch a couple of new programs because we're just getting started. As I said, the brownfield remediation program, we're actually going to do that here in the next couple of weeks, and the demolition program. $350 million for brownfield projects. $150 million for demolition projects. And all of these programs are going to help revitalize hazardous and blighted sites in our communities and help prepare them for future development. Because quite frankly, projects like these are catalysts in our communities for development, and they help provide a clean slate for future projects. And at development, we want to help you get these projects done. And we're committed to helping you find additional ways to help support Ohio businesses and you as well. Remember, at development, we're here to help. Remember that Governor Mike DeWine, Lieutenant Governor Husted are committed to making good on the promises they made a couple of years ago to invest in this region, to help build local capacity. We're going to put these resources to good use. Just keep in mind, whatever it is that you need, please pick up the phone. You know how to get a hold of Director Carey. You know how to get a hold of us. We want to continue to be a great partner for you. The future looks really, really good. We've got a once in a generation opportunity, and we're going to do a lot of really great things, and we're going to do it together. Have a great day. Keep in touch and be good. Thank you very much.
Well, as Director Mahalik was talking about, and you may have heard over the weekend, the infrastructure bill passed Congress will give us some additional resources with power. And one thing I just want you to keep in mind before I introduce Jay and Brenda is that you don't have to understand all these programs or memorize all these programs. Just contact us if you have questions, and we'll be glad to follow up with you. Jay is from Muskingum County. He was a service director at Zanesville and has worked in public service his entire life. And he has particularly worked on broadband projects, but not exclusively. And Brenda Haas is from Lawrence County, and I've worked with her at Shawnee State and also worked with her at ODHE when she retired. Same thing I did with Jay. How would you like to come work for us? And they both graciously agreed to use their experience to help communities put together projects for power. And I'll turn it over to them, let them explain what that is.
First of all, I want to thank Director Carey for this opportunity and to allow me to come out of retirement and work with such a wonderful program as Power. Power Initiative is designed to assist a broad range of a region, the communities that's been negatively impacted by changes in the coal industry and power sector. And we see that across Ohio Appalachian counties. The eligible applicants are pretty clear in the RFP in the Power Initiative. The local development districts, the LDDs, Indian tribes, states, counties, cities, other political subdivisions of our state, higher education institutions, or a consortium. And lastly, public or private nonprofit organizations are all eligible applicants. The ARC recently released their primary investment goals. They renewed these for the next few years. And I'm going to talk about each of these here shortly. Next slide. When you're looking at a power grant, it's very important to think strategically. Each of our LDDs are listed here on the PowerPoint slide. The power application must align with not only the goals I'm going to discuss here shortly from ARC, but with our Governor's Office of Appalachia and the LDD's primary investment goals. So as you're thinking about your proposal, remember strategic alignment. It's very important in the application. Now we'll go into more depth on the new 5 investment goals. Goal number 1 is building our businesses in Appalachia. It can to provide financing, technical assistance, other support for small business development in the region, or pursue economic and enterprise development strategies that will grow existing industries, support diversification in economics, and advance the prosperity at the regional level. So think regionally as you're thinking about an idea for a proposal. Goal number 2 is building Appalachia's workforce ecosystem. This can help develop and support educational programs and institutions from the early childhood through post-secondary that provides those building blocks for skill development and long-term employment. You can invest in workforce development programs and strategies, leaning on the industry talent needs and designed to allow workers to earn, learn, and advance along a career pathway. And again, develop that network of supports to help our Appalachians residents enter and remain in the workforce, and lastly, expand high quality healthcare as well as programs and services that support mental and physical health for workers and their families. Goal 3 is building Appalachian infrastructure. As Director Carey just said, we recently heard there's going to be additional funding across not just power, but all areas. We need to have affordable basic infrastructure to meet the needs of our residents and businesses. So your proposal could address that. Ensure that they have access to quality and affordable telecommunication and broadband services. Support efforts to adopt alternative energy strategies and booster energy infrastructure. And complete the development of the Appalachian Highway System and invest in intermodal transportation systems to connect businesses and residents with the global opportunities. You can support construction of business development sites, public facilities, and adaptive reuse of obsolete or unsafe properties to help stimulate the economics and community development of the region. Goal number 4 is building our regional culture and tourism. You may invest in the development of our Appalachian downtowns and provide support for Appalachian placemaking. Invest in the community and economic development initiatives that preserve and promote our Appalachian community's vibrant arts, culture, and heritage traditions. Preserve and expand the natural resources to increase outdoor recreation opportunities for residents and visitors and support sustainable economic growth. And lastly, the 5th ARC investment goal is building community leaders and capacity. You may develop, support, and empower community leaders that are representative of your local community, inclusive in your approach, and focused on long-term innovative strategies and solutions. Building capacity of community organizations and local development districts to access and manage funding, administer programs, and execute projects through implementation. Invest in developing the capacity of your community to build the ecosystems where government, nonprofit, business, and your other partners go around a shared vision for economic and community prosperity. And again, collaborate to implement that vision. So, what are the parameters of the Power Implementation Grant? You can propose a project up to 1.5 million there and 2.5 million if it's broadband with match required. This is based on the 2021 application. The 2022 RFP will most likely be released in January of 2022. So what I'm telling you is based on the recently period of grants. You can work it 24 to 36 months to complete the project. And remember, the implementation grants are awarded for support of program delivery. You can also request funding to support construction that's incidental to your project. Now we're going to go to the actual outline of the application. And I'm going to spend a little time talking about each of these. I'm just going to give the overall highlights. But the first thing when you go to the RFP, or it was in 2021, was to work on a project description. The project description starts by explaining in summary, what is your scope of work? Be clear and concise and describe that scope of work. Include a timeline. I always, when I work with groups proposing a project, ask them to do a timeline from their early planning stage, maybe even before the RFP came out. What have you already been working on all the way to the conclusion if you are awarded the money? A timeline of activities and milestones. And then geographic scale. Highlight your geographic areas of focus. You have to identify that in your project description, so be thinking regional. Co-impact is the second part of the RFP. You should be using the ARC research reports on co-impact. They have quite a bit of research on their website, but use third-party other sources of research as well to support your narrative. How have you been impacted? The direct impact to job loss due to the coal industry or its supporting job losses. The third part is rationale. Each of these components are weighted for the readers to score. For instance, rationale will be many more points than project description. So as you look at your RFP, you'll have a rubric. I would very much encourage you to look at that rubric with scoring. The rationale is the largest part. It's your planning and support assessments. Do you have a feasibility study? What has your planning been like? Is there other research and analysis in your area, your regional area, that can support your project design? And again, aligns with those regional priorities. I've already spoke to the strategic alignment, but that's so important. You can write it in the narrative. I've seen it put into charts, how each part connects to your project. Again, the assessment, the market analysis. If you have a market analysis, this would be a section where you would want to include that. Evidence of local demand. When you ask for letters of support, I consider the local demand. Are there other people or organizations that say, yes, that's a good idea, and can write a letter of support? Are there others that are really your partners that are going to commit, match, or time or effort? Committed partners. So make sure you have both types of support. And sustainability. Can this go beyond your 24 or 36-month project, or is it just going to end? Sustainability is huge. Project team, again, regional. Think of your key project partners and each of their role in your proposed project. Multiple stakeholders are very much desired in the RFP. How do they work into your project? What is their role? What's their responsibility? Again, this would be your committed partners, and they should reflect that in their letter of support, that they are committed to do what they said they would do. So it connects back to your application. Organizational capacity. Has your organization had past practice with large grants? Do you have management of federal grants or other grants that you can cite? And then readiness. If awarded the grant funds, are you ready to hit the road running? Usually the start date is October, November. You should start your timeline to reflect that and make sure you have in your grant proposal your readiness to go. Most proposals do not go to contract until around December 1st. So just think of your timeline as you're working through that. Outcomes and outputs. Everything's data-driven in our world. So make sure when you work with your outcomes and your outputs that they align with your scope of work. If your work is saying we're going to do X, make sure your outcomes have, how are you going to get to X? What is your methodology? How did you come to that? And you can estimate outputs and outcomes, but be realistic, relevant, and make them achievable. You know, I've seen and I've read and rated a lot of grants. 100% of anything is almost impossible. We know that life happens. So be realistic with your outcomes. Match and budget evaluation is your last piece. If you could go to the next slide. The Power grant does have a match component. It's based on your ARC designation of your county. This is a map of the 2022 county economic status. And as you can see, they can either be distressed, at risk, or transitional. Based on your status, that will be your match requirement. If it's multiple counties, there are two different ways of figuring match. Jay and I both can help proposals arrive at what that match would be. And I want to stress that match doesn't have to just be cash. It can be in kind, it can be a loan, it could be another grant that parallels your proposal, as long as it's not power. You cannot match power to power. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jay. Thank you for your time.
In this case, it was beauty before age on all accounts. So ARC recognizes that not everybody is ready for an implementation grant. That, hey, we've got an idea. You know, you think back to the goals. We want to build a new business park to create economic development opportunities. We need an upgrade to our water and wastewater facilities in a part of our counties that may not be serviced. We want to look at 3 counties that align by connection and do broadband service expansion within those areas. We want to do workforce development in partnerships with our educational districts to create a workforce that is ready for an emerging need within our region. So they recognize that they're just not ready, and they offer what's known as technical assistance grants. These are small, $50,000 as we know it right now. Grants match required, again, to the economic status. But they're up to 12 months. We're going to look at, in Morgan County's case, Noble County's case, they needed a technical assistance grant to be able to look at broadband within their counties to say, okay, we're going to convene this team and look at opportunities. We're going to meet with our partners, the providers, and see what we can do. What are the other SWOT analysis that we're going to perform over 12 months, and then we'll be back for an implementation. And ARC fully expects you to come back to them and ask for 2.5 million of their money. But they recognize that you may not quite be at that point yet. Next slide. So as Brenda talked about, the application is 15 pages. So no difference in number of pages on all of these subjects. She just went over many of those. The big difference is you get into a technical assistance, they're going to ask you, what is the plan for transition to implementation? So, okay, you've done this planning, but what is the actual steps you're going to take? And that is a big part of getting an award of $50,000 to be able to do that. But very much the same type of things. Teams are put together. Morgan County, we had the school district, we had government, we had the CIC, we had health, we had education, and they worked putting that application together. They were very successful. Next slide. So thinking about next cycle, this is again based upon, oops, back slide. Next power cycle, grant cycle. This is based upon last cycle's schedule but they'll release it mid-January. That kind of dictates how much money is available, what the process are, what their ranking as far as scoring metrics is going to be this cycle. The portal opens in mid-February. Letter of intent is a one-page project summary letter. Very simple. It lists an overview of your project, who the partners are, how much money you're asking for. And then the due date is mid-April. Award usually fall. And at that point, contracts. Something to keep in mind, and Brenda and I always kind of mention when we get contacted by the GOA staff or by the local development district staff, and we talk to an applicant and their team, we always say start early. Because it is difficult to do everything required. You have to have legislative authority getting that process in place. You have to have funding commitment letters, that process in place. Your project partners, defining them. Who are they? Who are logical partners? Jeanette Allen and I worked on a project over in Belmont County. I'm sorry, Steubenville area. And the first year they did not get funded, we went back and linked them to West Virginia because they were serving communities in West Virginia, coming across, citizens coming across for their services. And that was a huge part of that funding this last cycle. So that's the kind of work the local development districts and Brenda and I get to do. We're blessed to be able to help them put those applications together and put those systems together and put those commitments together. So start early. We've got projects in the hopper. I was on the phone this morning with an application already. Legislative, letters of support, financial commitments, and also please notify the state governor's office of Appalachia, or if it's West Virginia or Kentucky, you have to reach out and let them know as well. Next slide. Recent power investments in Ohio. 2015, all the way down to 2021. Money is flowing. All important areas of investment for our region. Next slide. Questions. We wanted to make sure we left a lot of time for you all to ask questions. Also, there are the hardest working people in show business, I mean development business, across the local development districts. They are excellent. You reach out to them, and I'm sure you're contacting them for routine projects, routine questions, but hey, we want to talk about a power application. And they'll contact Brenda and I, and we'll get started. We'll roll our sleeves up and get going. We're happy to take your questions.
Thank you both, Jay and Brenda. Okay, we're going to let Mr. Good here go first, and then we have a couple questions in the chat that we'll hit on.
Thank you. Yeah, quick question. What is the look back period for the coal impact? And can ARP money be used towards power?
And ARC, your existing Appalachia Regional Commission money?
No, the American Rescue Plan
Oh,
funding.
it can, yeah.
Can it be,
ARC,
can it be applied towards a power grant?
yes.
And what is the look back period for the coal impact with the
They-
time frame?
2010 was the last, 2015 was the last report. I've not looked at it within the last couple of months. I've not seen where they've updated that analysis, but they do. Our ARC staff updates it every year on any new information.
We've had some closures immediately before 2010 because of time periods with the Clean Air Act and amendments and some of the other.
Right, I would include that in your proposal because that is, if it's still impacting your economics of your region, you could make your proposal show that this happened and here's why we haven't recovered.
Thank
And
you.
you can include other things too, not just the ARC data. I know
Yes.
OU Vonovich has some wonderful studies and other organizations as well.
Now, ARC staff does update with new information every year on impacts, but they're looking at supply chains as well.
Right.
Alan? Okay. Yeah, the last report they kind of did was what, 15, 16, Alan,
I think so.
Kentucky, or some of the states with the other, ARC hired a contractor, kind of did loss reports. But yeah, ARC and their legislative authority is one of the only federal grants that you can match to other federal grants.
There is one point you need to remember. If you have an open power grant, you cannot reapply for a different power grant. It has to be closed out by October.
Okay, before we get to you, Tom, I'm just going to hit this virtual question, which was similar to Mr. Goods. And just to clarify that folks are able to use their ARPA dollars as match for power applications. Okay, Gretchen. Okay, we'll go over here to Mayor Johnson.
Yeah, two things. First of all, is it safe to assume that the Ohio Appalachian region is primarily coal impacted and that's not going to be the barrier to funding for most communities?
I would say there are regions within Ohio that have more impact than other regions.
The other thing is, could you go back one slide and share a little bit about the funded projects that have happened? There's been some really great projects in our region that it'd be nice for the people to hear a little bit more about what those projects did and how they're structured.
Specifically in 2019, that's kind of when I was starting to get involved, understanding, looking back at some of those projects that were funded. You get into broadband, the showcase application funded that year was the Buckeye. Yeah, Buckeye Rural Electric. They received $2.5 million to be in, I think, 5 or 6 counties at that time. It's now they're asking for an expansion of that into 7 counties to build this, take off the middle mile, kind of build a backbone within those counties that would then allow others to come onto their facilities and be able to extend into businesses and anything on.
The other thing is if you come up with an idea and we know it's already been funded, I would connect you to those people that were successful and just ask them about their proposal. We're a very caring group in Appalachia. We share. That's the way we make progress. But sharing of ideas is a wonderful thing.
2020 entrepreneurship. That was the seed project, I believe, Ohio University, correct? Broadband again, you had Denton County that got funding for communication towers in Benton County, so they're working on that project. 2021, I mentioned the urban emission project over in Steubenville area and their project for workforce development.
I was just looking at the growth in workforce as well as tourism. Tourism came about of 2019. We've seen some great.
The Bailey's
proposals
Trail,
there.
right?
Bailey's
That was
Trail.
the 19 project. That's huge.
Thank you. To add to that, do you have any examples of the projects that have funded substance abuse programs?
I haven't worked with any.
My mind just went blank.
Okay,
Yep.
John will touch on that.
I just wanted to clarify, Brendy, when you said you can't get a power grant if you have an existing one, what if it's a technical assistance and then you're finishing and you apply, you would be okay in that
You can do
situation?
that. You can also be a partner, you just can't be lead applicant. I guess I need to clarify.
Okay.
If you're a lead applicant on a power grant and it's still in progress, you need to be a partner with another lead applicant. You can do that.
But you could be
But
still,
you could be a technical.
right, you could be doing a technical assistance and
Right.
then apply for the implementation, knowing that the technical assistance done by the time the new grant award.
Right.
That would,
I was,
okay.
I was talking about implementation.
Right,
should
I just-
clarify.
I just wanted to make sure I was
Oh, sure.
clear. Yep, thanks.
Thank you. Just want to clarify that last point. Colleen Gallagher from WANRAC, we build the open access fiber networks. You can be a partner on multiple grant applications as long as you're not the lead. You're partnering with this county or that county or this area.
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
you can. However, as a reviewer, would you be looking at, and you get a couple applications, say, wait a minute, how many partnerships is this one agency or this one organization on? Because then you start calling into their capacity, right? To be what are their roles? I would start looking at. So I think you have to look at that as a strategy. And I know the team, the local development district team would look closely at that, make recommendations.
And we can address that in the capacity part of each
Yes.
application.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to, we do had someone in the chat, and this is to your question, Mayor Lyle, that the Lights program out of Shawnee State in partnership with Ohio University and Hawking College does merge technical assistance and recovery work. So there is a model, I guess, out there that could be referenced. And then my question for you all would be, when a community or a county or whoever has a power project, or they think that they want to go after this, but they don't have a lot of resources, what is your recommendation to them to get this done?
I've seen some very creative use of local match. I think Benton County, because they were very, very strapped, they used the value, appraised value of property and what could be charged for that property as a way to show that that was being committed to their tower sites. Other grants are a great resource. We've used Community Reinvestment Act, bank CRA requirements, a small amount for a project. In kind, I think Morgan County, Scan Valley Health, Genesis Health Systems, they were committing a couple $1,000 plus some of the time that they would have staff as part of their project team. So the value, county time was part of that, education time was part of that commitment. So they're
Right.
very, very great. They are very great about looking at that. It's flexible.
I'm hearing flexible and creativity.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect.
But they like cash too.
Oh, okay. Cash is always good.
I always try to stress if you can have a mixture, it looks good for the readers. Even if it's just a small amount of cash, it shows that there's some, across the board.
Thank you, Brenda J. Stay right there for a few minutes. And Austin, could you come up, please? Austin Ward works in our office, the governor's office of Appalachia. And he is from Benton County, coincidentally, and a proud graduate of Ohio State. And then Julia is holding down the office today, Julia Hinton. Just a couple things I wanted to say. You see the local development district's contact number there. We work very closely with the local development district. So if you have any questions about projects, contact them. They're a great resource. We work very closely together, and we think we have the best team in Ohio. And And I think other states look at what we do. There are a couple of other things that are bread and butter. The reason the governor's office of Appalachia was created is local area development funds. And many of you may be familiar with those, but those are the ones you apply if you're in the Buckeye Hills region or VREC or Eastgate or Omega. You apply directly through them and through their process. And those funds are really important. And sometimes you may want to think about, well, is this a power project? There's this Inspire project. There's this local development project. So feel free to contact your local development districts. You can also contact our office. We'll be glad to have that discussion with you. And there was some question about Inspire. Inspire is a recovery to work program. The maximum amount right now is $500,000. The timeline is a little different than the power grants. It starts at a later date, usually in May, Austin. And but we'll have that. We don't have those timelines together. It is also a competitive grant. Congress has also put more money in that grant. We've had great success. Those who apply generally are funded because they put together good applications. Some examples in OVRDC region, we had a project where they worked with Belicio Foods, and they were able to invest in this project, but also worked with Jackson Denton Community Action, Ross County Community Action. And they really put together a model that where the private business is working closely together with community action agencies to provide wraparound services. So we're really excited about that project. We think that will be something that others may want to learn from. In Lawrence County, there was a project for that was just funded in the last round through the judge. The judge has a program where he helps people in recovery to land jobs and place them in positions and provide those supports. And then in the Eastgate district, Kathy's district, we had Flying High, which is a great program, and they were funded. So I would encourage you to think about it. Sometimes you have to decide. You can apply for substance abuse grant through Power. It's more competitive and you get more money, but the Inspire grants, at least at this point, haven't been as competitive as the Power grants. So if you have any questions about that, just let us know. I want to thank you. Again, I want to stress, it's not up to you. At least I don't think it's your responsibility. And remember every program in the Department of Development and how it works, or even in state government. So if you have a project you want to talk about, especially in those counties that have low capacity, those are particularly the counties that we want to help. Just talk to us. We can at least talk to you about your project. We may not be the ones, but we can at least provide you some resources. So we're here to work with you and enjoy doing that. Austin, do you want to say anything about the about the area development districts?
Yeah, that program is more of ARC's bread and butter program. So those are your first contact there is the LDDs, and they'll get you started on those. Power and Inspire, like we said, are the competitive programs, and of course you can work with the LDDs on those too. But Brenda and Jay are here to help with that stuff too.
Last two. I have 1 minute left before it's 11 o'clock. Think collaboration and regional. That's what all the funding sources are asking. So, and it's one of the ways you can do that is call us, because if you're thinking about a project, your neighbor 30 miles down the road may be thinking about the project, and we may be able to link you together, or there may be a state agency. So if we get the letter of intent right before when it's due, we've never heard of the project, we're going to think, well, why don't we know about this? So it's the most important part I hope you take away from this is that we have resources available to help you figure this out, and that you need to communicate with us as you think about your project, whatever it is, and the local development districts, because they're the boots on the ground. There's only a few of us, and they do a great job. So thank you. Thank you for.
Well, John, we have one more question in the chat, so I'm going to ask you all to stay there just for a few more minutes. The mayor of Lisbon has asked, what sort of tourism projects would you like to see submitted? Are there certain projects that tie into economic development that have more success, or do you have recommendations there?
Well, I'm going to try to answer this as concisely. Actually, there's a lot going on with tourism. Ohio is part of a 6-state grant with EDA for outdoor recreation and tourism. So it's more of global vision. It's that's part of the Build Back Better. One of the big grants are 75 to 100 million. We just applied to the technical assistance. So we're waiting to see if we're invited, but we're optimistic about that. On the state level, we work very closely with Tourism Ohio, and we've been using our social media presence and our presence to go outward with tourism. Probably one of the best things that the mayor could do is just contact us, let us know what he's thinking, and then we can talk to him about that. But again, we're talking about tourism. We're talking about the 32 counties and how we can market those. And it's a priority of our office, not only for tourism as an economic development driver, but also as a way to tell our own story instead of somebody else telling it for us. So we're working closely with the Fire Department of Natural Resources on that.
Fair.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all again. That was really great. And I think what I heard there was pick up the phone and make a phone call. Even if you're just thinking about an idea, make a phone call and see who you can get to have that discussion with you and maybe move something forward. So, okay, we're going to move on to the second panel today, and that is on COVID relief opportunities. And I know personally, when I think of all this money coming around COVID relief to communities, my head spins every day. I'm having a hard time keeping up, which I'm sure most of you are too. But it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, and one of our partners for this is Misty Crosby, the Executive Director for Buckeye Hills Regional Council. I'll turn it over to Misty.
Good morning. There's a lot happening. I don't know if any of you were watching the news, but I'm going to start off with some things you already know and try to breeze through those because we've been living CARES Act and American Rescue Plan Act for a while, and then dig right into the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. So I don't know, is this going to work? Do you need to do it, or does this work? Oh, I think I had to go back. Oh, there we go. Got it. Maybe, or maybe she's doing it. So COVID relief to date, very quickly, the CARES Act was signed into law in March 2020. That included 1.5 billion in funding for the Economic Development Administration. And the local development districts were, economic development districts, I guess, from the Economic Development Administration were awarded some non-competitive CARES funding. In the Buckeye Hills region, we have identified a project in each one of our 8 counties through the Economic Development Office, and we are in the process of requesting proposals for those projects and doing supporting a planning or technical assistance project in each county, and that will hopefully also help beef up our comprehensive economic development strategy that we have to turn into EDA every year. There was also 100 million for the Reconnect program. And then the American Rescue Plan Act, that was the ARPA funding signed into law in March 2021. And that was $3 billion to the U.S. Department of Commerce, the Economic Development Administration. And you know, that agency typically receives about $380 million a year. And they received a $3 billion allocation to roll out. And it's been exciting. That's actually twice the amount of EDA funding included in the CARES Act and 10 times their typical award. There was also $350 billion that was for the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery that a lot of you in this room as local governments received a direct allocation for those funds. And I will talk about those. Ohio also received some funding, and they are putting their ARPA dollars to work. First up is House Bill 2, that Ohio Residential Broadband Expansion Program that was very near and dear to our hearts. And there's $250 million in grants, as Director Michalik said, they're due today. And we are excited to see what projects come out of that for our region. And then the Ohio Builds Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Grants. A lot of our communities received some announcements out of those grant fundings, and that was really hard to fund projects and prioritized at the local level. So we were excited about all of those investments and announcements that were made by the DeWine administration, and thank our legislators for supporting that funding. Next up is CARES investment in RISE Ohio, and Mayor Johnson wanted me to make sure that I was specific about this project that we've got going on. So during EDA's CARES investment in Appalachia, Ohio, the Voinovich School took the lead and applied for funding from EDA for RISE Ohio, which is the Resilience Initiative for Southeastern and Eastern Ohio. Very clever of Jason Jolly, Dr. Jolly. It was a $2.2 million project. It was awarded to the Voinovich School, partnered with Omega, Jeanette and her team, and Buckeye Hills Regional Council. Funding and match is provided by the Voinovich School through their Appalachian New Economy Partnership line item, as well as Jobs Ohio. So we were happy to have the support of Jobs Ohio on that. And that's really helping communities in our 18 county region. So Buckeye Hills is 8 counties, Omega's 10 counties, to make an economic transition to new industries, really ensuring job creation as well as economic growth and diversification. That new funding will enable the communities that are located in the region and with opportunity zones, enable them to do planning in those zones, along with assisting them with the impacts of coal-fired power plant closures. So specific communities that can expect to see support through that initiative and through that project, we're working through those now, are Albany, Athens, Chauncey, Clarington, Dexter City, Logan, Malta, Marietta, McConnellsville, Middleport, Nelsonville, New Lexington, Pomeroy, and Somerset. Those are in the 8-county Buckeye Hills region. And then in Omega's 10 counties specifically are Yorkville, Tiltonsville, Mingo Junction, Steubenville, Bel Air, Bethesda, Wellsville, Cadiz, Hopedale, New Philadelphia, Dover, Yerkesville, Killbuck, Zanesville, Byesville, and Carrollton. There are a lot of small communities that we're going to be working with, as well as those, townships, other levels of government that might be included. Their jurisdiction falls within that opportunity zone. So really stay tuned for more information. We've contracted together, Buckeye Hills and Omega issued a RFP, and we've awarded that to Steadfast City. That's really, they're going to lead and help our communities identify additional investments in their opportunity zones. So digging into each specific community zone, what is it that they want to try to attract to their community? What is it that they want to do with their zone? And then Steadfast City and their expertise through the Opportunity Appalachia program, they've already managed that opportunity zone investment. They plan to help those communities identify investable projects. And by investable, I mean outside investment, bringing in private investment into those zones, as well as there's an unprecedented amount of funding coming from the federal government right now. So how do we ensure that those zones also get some attention with those dollars? And how do we leverage the local dollars more efficiently to bring in those federal funds? So it's going to be exciting. It's a huge lift. At the end of the day, I think both Buckeye Hills and Omega, we would like to have a regional prospectus of projects developed that we can then market, similar to Opportunity Appalachia and what they've already done with that much larger project. So we are excited about that, and stay tuned for more information and reach out to myself or to Jeanette if you have questions about when your community's coming up. Steadfast City's busy meeting individually right now. EDA also published a notice of funding opportunity that was inclusive of the $3 billion. They've created like 6 or 7 programs. The Build Back Better Challenge was due October 19th, I believe, while we were all in Portland at the NATO conference. Buckeye Hills is the lead applicant on one of those Build Back Better applications, and that project involves a coalition of 10 villages and partner organizations. who really are looking to work together to develop, retain, and attract small businesses into those communities, really focusing in on revitalizing our downtowns, creating vibrant places and communities that are attractive to draw folks in, places where people want to live, they want to work, they can shop, they can earn a living right here locally at home in our small communities. Our village coalition partners right now include Caldwell, Corning, Crooksville, Gloucester, Hemlock, McConnellsville, Middleport, New Straitsville, Shawnee, and Woodsfield. Those communities were identified based on population and other demographics, and the fact that they had a little bit of a downtown right now that they were trying to lift up. So we are excited about that. We also had letters of support from several chambers of commerce, and we were very pleased that the Governor's Office Appalachia, the Voinovich School, and Dean Weinberg, the Ohio Arts Council, the Mayor's Partnership for Progress, Rural Action, Noble County Extension, Heritage Ohio, others came on board and wrote letters of support for that effort because we are excited. And I am, even if we don't get invited on a Build Back Better application, because again, there were 526 submissions across the country. It's going to be very competitive. What that process enabled us to do is to pull together our concept and ideas and get those on paper and build that coalition so we can now move forward. There are other opportunities coming. So, I mean, I'll talk about those in 1 minute, but there are other opportunities coming. And I think that it's just the Appalachian region of Ohio, we're ready. We've been working together for a long time, and we're ready to, I think, put our best foot forward and try to secure some of these resources for the region. Alyssa wanted me to talk a little bit about some best practices, and all of these slides are going to be put up on the website later. So all of those resources include links and all that. I just didn't want to read you all of those slides. You do not want to hear me do that. So recently, the National League of Cities recently assembled an online directory of projects and initiatives that communities across the country of all sizes have undertaken during the pandemic, and including those that are being funded with ARPA dollars. So thinking critically about how you might creatively use your ARPA funds to better your community, you know, once in a lifetime sum of money that's coming directly to you, that's kind of flexible in the sense that, you know, folks are really looking for ideas for impactful projects. That website lists hundreds of plans and proposals that you can browse. Drew Tanner in my office, he's right back there, the communications director. He drilled down into those communities, 30,000 and under. And I know you're all sitting here going, my community is like 1,200. I realize that, like, we totally know the scale, but these communities are receiving those direct allocations like we are. So thinking of your community and how to right size some of these things for your community, it's going to involve a lot less funding. We know you received a lot less funding, but there are some interesting ideas that you might want to consider. And a lot of those are stormwater, water, wastewater, right? There's plans to use funds for budget stabilization, law enforcement, those things that are prescribed, not really easy, but I would say easier to do than some of these other out of the box things. So some of the projects that Drew had pulled out that were interesting, Port Angeles in Washington is contributing $337,000 toward a project to purchase and convert a local motel into a 27-unit low-income housing complex for those who struggle with chronic mental illness. I mean, that's interesting. And the fact that the community had obviously identified that need and said, hey, we're never going to be able to do this any other way. Why can't we do it here? I mean, investing your ARPA dollars into a low-income tax credit eligible census tract for affordable housing is a slam dunk. It's eligible. So go forth, everybody, build low-income housing. I guess I can't say that, but there's also a resource center and a shopping center in Hillville, Kentucky. They purchased it with monies from the CARES Act, and they're going to lease space to nonprofits. The city of Oswego, New York, issued a $15,000 grant from their ARPA dollars to purchase a bookmobile to administer their Driving Books Home program. So, folks can't get out, and we still want to provide educational opportunities and support for our residents. Jeffersontown, Kentucky is partnering with their Association of Community Ministries to distribute emergency rent and utility assistance. I know HAPCAP did an outstanding job during that first onset of CARES and those dollars that came rolling out, funding through their programs to serve low-income folks in Hocking, Athens, and Perry County. It was really a tremendous amount of work being done by a very limited staff capacity at HAPCAP. So just know that we're all at the table to help you, and we want to hear your ideas. And if you need to talk something through, or you want us to check on something for you or run something down on eligibility, we're willing to do that for you. We also have the ARPA Resource Center. Visit that website that has the link to the National League of Cities, as well as a whole host of other programs that are possibly of interest to you on the ARPA use. And now we'll get into the legislative outlook. There was an announcement that the bipartisan portion of the infrastructure bill, so the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is very cleverly IIJA, passed the Senate and the House. That's now going to become law. I don't know if the president has signed that yet, but we anticipate that will happen soon. That provides $1 billion with a B dollars for the Appalachian Regional Commission over 5 years. So that's an additional $250 million a year, or $200 million a year for ARC, on top of its allocation of $210 million, I think is what they normally get. And just think about that, right? So that the regular appropriation, it's a continuing resolution. I'll get to the continuing resolution in a few minutes, but the ARC will receive under the CR $210 million that it always receives. There's the power program in there that's designed for that. And then they're going to get another $200 million per year for the next 5 years. It also reauthorizes the ARC, and that is a very exciting. It adds 2 counties in North Carolina and 1 in South Carolina. So there'll be 3 more counties. It'll be more competitive in those states, but it also creates a new regional energy hub and funds that at $5 million per year that can support through research and grants an ethane storage facility somewhere in Appalachia. That's exciting. And it really requires ARC to do a lot more coordination. ARC did a great job coordinating with NTIA and EDA and others. They do that throughout all level of programs, but the broadband, they're really dug in a little bit more on requiring ARC to document that coordination with NTIA and others on the areas that are to be served with ARC funds. And then it does specify that 65%, at least 65% of the funds be used under the statutory authority to go for construction and deployment of actual infrastructure. So they have a broadband funding, they have to deploy infrastructure with it, and they have to coordinate with NTIA and others. It's not a bad thing, it's a great thing. Like, I'm so excited about that. Then there's also, sorry, I missed, am I taking too long? Okay, there's a 1.25, this is so exciting to me, you have no idea. There's $1.25 billion over 5 years in dedicated funding for the Appalachian Development Highway System. And I've reached out to Jordan at ODOT. He's our RTPO contact, to talk to him about that. That's $10 million a year at a minimum per each state that still has some ADHS miles to go. Buckeye Hills' region doesn't, but I believe OVRDC's region does, and perhaps even Omega, I don't know. But John, you got 10 million coming per year for 5 years. This is awesome. It also creates a new digital equity grant program at the Department of Commerce. It specifies that in establishing that program, the Assistant Secretary shall consult with, among others, the ARC Federal Co-Chairs. That is great news, that the ARC Federal Co-Chair is named as an individual that the Department of Commerce, NTIA, must consult with before deploying those dollars. It also creates the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program at the Department of Commerce. So the Build Back Better plan, the House has not voted on the Build Back Better plan yet. That's the infrastructure reconciliation bill. That is the partisan portion of that negotiation. Their failure to bring that forward was kind of a setback in the negotiation process, and it's really unclear right now what will happen with the Build Back Better plan. But among other things, it proposes $5 billion in funding for EDA, another $5 billion from the $3 billion that they're just now rolling out. It also includes funding for the USDA World Partnership Program. That's just a proposal at this time, but that is exciting when you read what that proposal is and what it would mean for, providing flexible funding, multi-year investments in collaborative planning, staffing, implementation efforts. That is exciting. That's really all across our region. We lack capacity at all levels of government, within institutions, just bodies and staff and knowledge to really deploy that throughout our region to help our region's members. So we are watching that very closely. It targets higher need rural communities with small populations and low incomes, and rural Appalachian Ohio fits that bill. 2022 appropriations update. So Congress passed a continuing resolution in order to avert a government shutdown and keep the government funded. That's through December 3rd, 2021. Beyond December 3rd, they'll either need to adopt another short-term spending bill or pass the dozen appropriation bills that are needed to fund the federal agencies for the remainder of the 2022 fiscal year. That likelihood of that happening between now and December 3rd is very slim. Senator Shelby, who's the vice chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, he's been quoted saying that a full year CR may be looking increasingly likely. Some folks don't, they don't appreciate that, but ARC's $210 million. Like the programs, the USDA, the funding will still keep coming at the level that it came last year. I would like them to appropriate more funds and pass another bill, but we're still going to get the resources that were available to us prior to that. I would be remiss if I did not say that much of this legislative update has come over the weekend from the National Association of Development Organizations. Muriel Bourgoin is the government relations person. Joe McKinney is the executive director. And I this year have the privilege of serving as NATO's president and just got elected in October, and it was exciting. I wasn't even there. I had a death in the family and I couldn't even be there, but it was really humbling and really nice that my peers across the country ascended me to the leadership position, and I look forward to serving on that. But the NATO team is really instrumental, and they're really the voice for rural regional development organizations across the country. They're also a huge advocate for rural communities, and they make the case and tie directly your work in your communities with regional development organizations, with federal policymakers and funders. And it really does, they do a great job of telling the story and securing resources for rural America. So I encourage you to check out NATO and also join NATO if you want to do that and support the voice of rural regions across the nation. And with that, I'll take questions, or I will turn it right over to Misty to move on to the next.
Okay, well,
That was a lot. There was a lot to cover.
as you can tell, Misty's a wealth of information. So she's always a good person to know. All the LDDs are. Okay, I'll go ahead and Mackenzie, or Elkin, you want to cue my slides, and we'll go ahead and just go through our presentations and see what time we have for Q&A after we're done.
Great.
Mayor Mason, feel free to come up here and join me now if you'd like. Okay, so as I mentioned, I serve as the executive director for the Mayor's Partnership for Progress. Some of you in this room probably have not heard of it. And so it is mayors and city managers in 18 counties in Southeast Ohio. We were originally established back in 1995. They became, they got together in 1995 and then formally established themselves in 1996. At that point, they signed a memorandum of agreement with Ohio University to provide that group technical assistance. So right now, as we've grown to 18 counties, we have just over 120 communities that are served by the group. the group really was put together, and I've got the map up there to show you. Go ahead to the next slide if you don't mind. So the group was really put together by a few mayors 25 years ago who said, look, we have a bigger voice when we all work together, and several of our members are here today. They start to share ideas and start to have collaboration. And so what I've done is outlined a few things that we do. We meet monthly. Now, obviously, when the pandemic hit, we had to shift to virtual, but and at that point, we actually met once a week, right? And so we kind of hit that hard for a while. We do have a legislative advocacy day in Columbus once a year, and that gives us a chance to go up and help the legislators know who the mayor's partnership is. And it also gives the mayors opportunities to have conversations with the governor, lieutenant governor, agency directors, and other leaders that we want to have open conversation with. What we also do is we do a lot of targeted communications across state and federal agencies. Obviously, that's ramped up a little bit during the pandemic, trying to advocate for the different communities and what they need, what they're not getting, what they're seeing their constituents need. So we spend a lot of time on the phone and writing letters and doing advocacy to get them the resources that they need to bring their communities forward. Yeah, and then we just provide technical assistance to them as needed. Some of them come up with ideas that Ohio University might have resources for, the Voinovich School might have resources for. And if we don't, we try to connect them with others in the region that can help them. So if any members, elected officials, mayors, city managers that are in this room today that are not members, I encourage you to reach out to me and get involved, because I don't think you'll regret it by any means. So I had put on here some examples of COVID relief funding in some of our communities, what they did. I don't think I'll go through that. You can read the examples up there, because Misty had quite a few good examples from across the region, or across the nation, actually. And those are some examples of some of our communities in southeastern Ohio. But what I wanted to do is actually turn it over to Mayor Mason out of the city of Zanesville, because he really kind of emerged during the first round of COVID relief funding for the CARES Act. And he was kind of a leader. He got out in front of some others and gave some great examples and got people thinking outside the box. So Mayor Mason, we're hoping you can kick us off here.
Thank you very, very much. By the way, on your sales pitch for the mayor's partnership, you left out the most important thing, and we have a good time. So join the mayor's partnership because we have a good time. Wait, see my next, that's not one of my slides.
No, it's
but
not. Go ahead. There we go.
There we go. And that is the beautiful wide bridge. One of the things we did early actually was we had a contest. I didn't like the old drab image the city had. And I thought, we got to really get this thing spirited. And so we had a contest. This is actually a photograph. Looks like a painting, but that's why you, I guess, have people who have all these tints and screens and computers that can make a nice photograph. So these are some of our best practices. Go ahead. Can you read that clearly from where you're at? I've got a bit of a glare. Well, let me just say this. One of the first things we did starting in March of 2020, mainly because we couldn't have the basketball pool, the NCAA March Madness, because that was scrapped. So we had to find another excuse to sit around. And so I brought in our team of people together of basically diversity, all ages and ethnicities representing our town. I mean, and what was nice is we had older people, such as me. We had younger people in their 20s and 30s. We had single moms in our group. And what we were trying to do is identify what is it we really need to do through this period of COVID. Where is the help? Where do people need help the most? The big concern we had is children were going to be home with their parents. Now, I'm sure many of you are in Appalachia like we are. And by the way, I want to make one note. In the history of the ARC, it seems like no county has ever dropped out, but more counties have come in. So we must be doing something right. But you probably have the same issue that we have, where there's a lot of children and they really depend on school, not just for education, but they depend on school for literally food and for mentorship, because they're not getting that at home and in their neighborhood. So again, this is where having a single mom on our staff to help give us some of her perspective really came in handy. Thank you. So as you can see, we started a program to help pay the utility bills and mortgages of those who are being impacted. And those are mainly people like, maybe they worked at hair salons, or they worked at, bars and restaurants, or in other businesses that were just shut down. And as a result, they didn't have the money for their utilities, their mortgages, their rent. And so we started sitting around and deciding how much money could we, of our original, I think around 800,000, 900,000. Ultimately, we had 2.4 million of CARES Act to spend. We started to allocate our funds, but I'll say this. One of the things we realized early is we didn't want people coming to City Hall, because we didn't have a program per se at City Hall to administer utility bills, to hand out the grant money or the mortgages or the rent. But there were people in town that did, mainly faith-based, church-based organizations had those programs, and they really operated from donations. And so I'll never forget calling the lady who ran Eastside Ministry and said, how would you like $70,000 to help pay rent? I mean, and she's like, is this a joke? Excuse me. And I'm like, no, this is us. This is what we're going to do. We didn't do that just once, but we did it a total of 3 times. So this organization received $120,000 to help again pay rent and utilities for people. That's what kept people in their homes. We didn't have people displaced. You would hear, if you watch national news about people being evicted, you only get evicted other than for criminal activity if you don't pay your rent. And so if the city's there paying your rent, helping pay the rent, you're going to stay there. And landlords don't want to have this churn of people coming, going. They like stability like everybody else does. So we were able to create this program with the Eastside Ministry. And again, Salvation Army and United Way and a community action agency. But again, we worked with entities that were sort of in the business of doing this. So all we had to do was write a check. And let me just tell you, that was the best part of it. And again, we're talking here about the social service agencies that we worked with. Again, Eastside Community Ministry, and this is actually a young lady who actually received support and was, again, very proud. She's on the homepage of Eastside Ministry. Now, when I was a kid growing up, Eastside Ministry was known as the Presbyterian Neighborhood Center. And that's where a lot of us kids back then, kids actually walked places. This is unique, isn't it? This is how old I am. We had actually walked. That was about 3 miles from where I lived. And we'd play basketball with all of our friends. And again, it was a faith-based organization now known as Eastside Ministry. And we work with them a lot. Continue. Again, getting back to the children, it's always about the children. It truly is. We realized these children were going to be at home. So we reached out across the city and established 8 what we'll call internet cafes. But these were places, it's a 3-legged stool. Not only did you have to have broadband, so we worked with Spectrum to get business class, high-speed internet. Then we also bought these huge Wi-Fi carts, and each of these carts could transmit up to 20 to 25 serve 20 to 25 Google laptops. So in each of these facilities, we put in one of these Wi-Fi carts. We bought a total of 260 Google Chromebooks. And by the way, we did this really early. I mean, literally before we knew for sure we had the money, because we knew the money was going to come. And we thought we got to get our order in, because if 2020 was known for COVID and 2021 was known as supply chain issues, I hope I never hear those 3 words again in 2022. But we got out there and got our laptops and distributed to these 8 locations. But again, it's a 3-legged stool. Not only did you have to have the broadband, you had to have the Google Chrome. We're not done, are we? Because the children needed one more thing. we needed tutors and mentors and support to help them actually with their homework. So we did work with Muskingum University. I would have done OU, but at that point in time, they still were not allowing, in-person contact. But again, I would have worked with OU. So, but the other thing, as I mentioned earlier, the children often would go to school really for food as a big part of it. So we actually also provide healthy snacks at these locations. Several of them were heavily used. Some would only have 1 or 2 people at night. But I feel like on any given day, we probably had about 20 to 25 children at almost any hour that were receiving some benefits from this program. This ended up being really great. And by the way, those programs are still continuing on. Next slide, Ben. Again, this is the Bethel Center. It's located in the old Putnam historic area. And those of you from Marietta, I always joke that yes, Rufus Putnam was involved in the founding of your town, but then went upriver. And we always know why you go upriver, right? The water's cleaner and founded part of our town. I just had to get that joke in. But anyway, this is in the Putnam area of our town, again, a low income area that even though our entire city is served with broadband, frankly, from a financial standpoint, many people in this area are not served with broadband. So the children were able to go to this area. We've actually also done neighborhood cleanups in this area involving the Rotary and other people. So it's become a great focal area for a lot of great activity. And we can go on to the next one. That just shows how close the kids, we're able to get them spaced somewhat at these locations. Next slide, please. Well, here was what's interesting. And actually in our audit, this question actually came up. So we actually put in speed humps and used some of the funds for these speed humps in school zones. And the question came back, well, how is this CARES? How's this? Well, it's an easy answer. And the truth is always your best defense. By the way, I used to do some criminal defense work, so I'll say this, truth is the best defense. But so the school board announced they had to expand the area from which they would pick up from normally was those further than 1 mile, and they had to make it so that further than 1.5 miles. And the reason was because of spacing on the buses, they actually had to reduce how many people were on each bus. So we realized that was going to mean 2 things. Number one, that would mean more kids would probably be walking that 1.5 mile distance, or number 2, to be parents or family members driving these kids within that 1.5 mile radius. Well, I don't know how the people are in your area, but in my area, red light means you have 2 seconds to shoot through that red light before you actually have to stop. Is that the way it is in Logan? By the way, I drive really slow in New Concord because I know you're constables there and Muskingum University constables, so I do the speed limit. But we really realized safety was a huge issue. So in one of the areas, we actually lowered the speed limit from 25 to 35 because these speed humps do work at 25 only and below. But then we put these in a lot of school zones. And again, we justified and based that we needed to slow the traffic down in order to get children safely in and out of school. Next slide. Christ Table, when I was, by the way, I was mayor, it was so long ago that Jay Bennett, who spoke earlier, actually I hired him on staff in the 1980s. By the way, now I have his niece who works for us in community development, and I'm reappointing his brother to a convention facilities authority. So we try to keep the Bennett family gainfully employed in my town, Jeanette. But going back, so Christ Table now serves primarily homeless and those who basically don't have enough money to afford a meal. When I was mayor back in the 80s, we literally had 3 homeless people. All 3 actually had families in the area, but for mental health reasons, they just really preferred the homeless lifestyle. That's gone from 3 in the 1980s to roughly 180 to 190 now. So Christ Table is, again, one of those organizations who used to feed about 40 meals at a time, twice a day, but now they're serving around 190. I thought I lost mine. Thank you. But they now serve about 190, 2 different meals a day. And again, going back to COVID, they no longer can eat within a facility about half the size. So they had to start packing the lunches and the dinners to go. And again, a lot of people came forward. We did a lot of food drives to get food donated. And we also contribute a lot of cash and capital to support those other things that have to be purchased. And that might be my last slide, but next one. I think that was my last. Yep, that was my last. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Mason. It looks like we're about on our timeline, so we're probably not going to take any questions unless there's somebody sitting there really burning with a question in their pocket. Mayor Feeney's smiling at me, so he probably did. Go ahead.
Misty's slide listed, I think, 4 examples of projects that were funded or submitted. I think my challenge has been reading through the regs and the guidance and the Q&As. Maybe 3 out of 4 or 2 out of 4 made sense to me. And then there was one that was like the city beefed up their cybersecurity. And I looked through the Q&As and I looked through everything. And, you know, if this was a year ago with CARES Act, it seemed a lot easier to sort of ram a square peg in a round hole. And it seems a little bit more challenging this time around. Do you have any thoughts on how cybersecurity fell into one of the buckets?
So I don't know that. And that National League of Cities website is CARES, COVID, other types of federal funding that are coming. So it might not have been specific to one pot or the other. Yeah, but I also found that interesting and think that National League of Cities could probably answer that question and we should follow up with them.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we'll end the panel. I would end it with one thing, saying just remind everybody that the new ARPA dollars that are coming to the NEUs, you'll get your second tranche, and you have until 2024 to actually say what you're going to do with those, right? And then you have 2 more years after that. You don't have to have those dollars spent until 2026, which is a huge timeline. And so I think that's why we really are wanting to encourage all of you to reach out to your partners in your communities, but also your local development districts, the mayor's partnership, et cetera, because I think it can have a huge impact if we do it the right way. So, okay, we are going to break for lunch, but let me tell you, we have a process here. Our lunch is in the back of the room, and I'm going to release us in SWATs of tables. And if you can get your lunch and then bring it back to your table, we are going to aim to try to start our panel at 12 o'clock. So 15 minutes. Let's see how fast folks can work their way through the lunch line today. So the front 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tables, if you want to go first. As Director Mahalik said, I'm one to shove in as much as we can during the day. So here we are, we're going to work right through lunch. I am really pleased and excited about this panel. One of the things I hear from a lot of our mayors and city managers is that advocacy is at the top of their list, that they want to learn more how to do it, but they just don't really know how to get started or how to be successful. So hopefully we'll learn a few tricks of the trade here or some insights from our panelists. I'm going to turn it over to John Hemmings with the Ohio Valley Regional Development Commission. Did I get that right? Ohio Valley Regional Development Commission. There you go. John, take it away.
Good afternoon. As Misty said, I'm the executive director of the Ohio Valley Regional Development Commission. My name is John Hemmings. I know many of you here. In addition to that, I also serve, that's my paying job, but something that I do with my partners at the other local development districts is I serve as the president of what is called the Ohio Rural Development Alliance. And it's a group we formed to advocate on behalf of rural Ohio back in 2017. And we have 11 members. Many of the folks that are in this room today or part of groups that are in this room today are part of that group. And basically it creates for us a way to advocate on behalf of the programs, the priorities in our region. And we take those issues up, and we have a government relations consultant who happens to be here at the table today. And through that process, we're able to, identify things that are priorities for us in the region, in rural, and not just Appalachia region, but as I said, rural Ohio. And some success stories we've had in the last budget. Some of you may know, some of you may not know, but one thing we were able to do and petition and work for was back in 2013, they set up in the state of Ohio regional transportation planning organizations in the rural areas of Ohio. 3 of the 4 LDDs were named RTPOs. We did get money out of this biennium budget to actually do some capital projects in our regions. So that was the success we had working with the legislature, working with our government relations group. And then also many of you, it was talked about the area development funding. In the state of Ohio, we have the federal ARC, but we also have state Appalachia money. That line item received an increase of $500,000 each fiscal year of this biennium budget. So those were just 2 of the successes. We're getting ready to put together a letter out to our members, which will include a lot of the other successes. But those were 2 that I know that we worked hard on and diligently to get to happen. As we start about advocating, I thought as I was getting ready this morning to drive up here, I thought this is kind of interesting. We're talking about advocacy as we eat. And when you were a kid, were you pretty much, you show up at the dinner table and you ate what mom gave you? Would that describe the majority of you? You weren't negotiating what was for dinner. Maybe once in a while, mom might say, what would you like? But most of the time you just kind of sat down and accepted what was put there on the table for you. But it would have been nice to have an advocate sometimes. I know sometimes I didn't like what mom prepared. So, but my mom's a great cook. Most of the meals I gladly took them and ate them. Are you enjoying this lunch today? Very good. Well, just so you know, Mista wanted to just give you guys water and 1 piece of bread, no butter. But these 2 gentlemen advocated on your behalf today and got you the lunch that you have. So you really want to listen to them now about advocating at the state capitol and at the Congress, and listen to what they have to say, because they're going to talk to you about what Amista said. How do you advocate for your community, your region, and your organization? And I'm just teasing about Amista. She did not have to do that, but I wanted to give these guys good plugs. So I don't know who's going to go first here, Greg or Brandon.
All right. I guess I'll go first. Thanks, Sean. That is patently untrue. I do not want to get on Amista's bad side. We had nothing to do with the lunch. In fact, the only way that we thought people would listen to us is if you were eating and fed while we were up here. So I really appreciate it. To a certain degree, it's humbling to be up here. You look out, there's former and current elected officials, both at the state and local levels. There's, agency directors, both current and former. There are advocates out there in the audience. So, I don't know that we have a lot to say or to teach you, but it's always a pleasure to be with this group, to be in this part of the state and to talk about the work that we do. So I really am thankful. My name is Greg Lesteem. I'm a partner at Bricker and Eckler. It's a law firm in Columbus, Ohio. We have offices all over the state, including an office in Marietta and another smaller office in Barnesville. So we spend a lot of time in the region, working on a lot of different things. We have a dedicated government affairs area and section within the firm. We're all lawyer lobbyists at Bricker. That's not necessarily typical. It kind of takes different forms at different places where they do advocacy work. But we have all of us lawyer lobbyists do some legal work and then also spend a lot of time doing advocacy work at the State House. And so I came up through the ranks, both at state and local government. I worked at the city of Columbus for a while, and I worked in the state Senate for quite a while before coming to Bricker. So, one of the things I think that we wanted to talk about was the fact that it really does help to have that knowledge of how things work on the inside. kid sometimes that when people ask me if I want to run for office, I say, people that work at McDonald's don't eat there because they know what happens behind the desk. But in truth, it really is important to know how the levers of power and government work at all levels. And I'll let Brandon talk a little bit more about some of the federal work that they do at the Farm Bureau, because we do not do federal work unless it's a very targeted, specific issue for a client that we do state work for, and we can leverage our state delegation at the federal level. Unless you're in DC and unless you spend all of your time doing that, it's really hard to walk up on Capitol Hill and have an impact. And so, that's just one little way of showing, why it's important to kind of pick what you're good at, try to be the best at it, and focus on that issue. I thought I'd hit on a couple things and then turn it over to Brandon, and then we can, either answer questions or kind of go back and forth. First of all, the advocacy is not easy, and it's not easy. It's not easy because those of us that do it all the time are so much smarter than everybody else. It's because it takes a lot of work, and all of you have other things that you need to be doing day in and day out. And so one of the things that we try to bring to our clients is that constant eye and ear on the State House. We talk a lot. Our team talks a lot about part of our job, and a big part of our job is taking all the information that we can possibly consume in a day's time, in a week's time, in a month's time, and distill that down into something that's usable and beneficial for our clients. So, of the things that we hear and the conversations we have, I would say, less than 10% might be something that we can leverage on, but you have to listen to all that stuff, and you have to have those conversations to get to that point where you have the good information that you can use. The other thing that's important is to, and this was kind of in the overview of this session, use the tools to your disposal. I kind of wanted to come up here and say, my suggestion is get outside counsel and hire a lobbyist, because that would benefit us. But that's only one tool, obviously. Outside counsel is certainly helpful. Someone who's in Columbus, who spends all of their time doing what we do, that's always helpful. But your trade associations help a lot. ORDA, I know, John spoke to some of the successes we've had, and those types of organizations are not only important for strength in numbers, but for that information gathering and sharing. A lot of that can be done through your fellow members when you're working on an item. Building allies, that's part of that trade association benefit, but you have to look outside of not only the groups that you're a part of or the areas that you spend time in, because there might be an issue where you and the heavy highway construction contractors have a lot in common. And if you can utilize those relationships and all go in together to talk about an issue, that just builds more credibility and builds more interest, amongst legislators to get something done. And then, the other tools are the technology tools, right? You have Gongwer and HANA that a lot of people are members of. There are other services out there at the federal level that gather news, information, updates on bills and rules that are being introduced. We use that every day as advocates within our practice. And I know a lot of our clients do as well. So, that's always important to remember. And then as far as the process goes, first and foremost, research and knowing your issue is critically important. That's not really as important for you all out there, because you live it every day. That's the most important thing you can do for your issues, is be there in the trenches, and then really speaking from the heart, when you're meeting with legislators or congresspeople or other elected officials. You do want to target legislators. And I know Brandon's going to talk to this a little bit. Make sure that you're focusing on the right members of the General Assembly or Congress. And that might not just be folks from your region. That might be people that are on the right committees. That might be people that have the right relationships, at the state level to get things done and have historically worked on this particular issue, even if they might not be as familiar with the issue at hand right in front of them. Building coalitions, like I said before, allies are critically important, and that always helps, not only from a messaging perspective, but from a division of labor perspective as well. And then using all legal avenues. I mean, we talk about that a lot within our group. We make sure that we say to ourselves, is this a legislative item that needs fixing at the legislature? Is it an administrative, could we solve it through an administrative rule? And then you're talking with state agencies and the governor's office, or is it something that might need a legal challenge? And, I think the nice thing, advertising Bricker for a minute, the nice thing about being at a law firm like that is that we can pivot on all of those levers if we need to, and we have in the past. And so that's really important as you're thinking about advocacy as well. Back to the research and knowing your issue, you want to make it as easy for legislators as possible. As much as it's time consuming and a big burden on you all to do advocacy, think about the number of items that legislators are working on, day in and day out. And the easier you can make it for them, both in the facts and the stats and the reasons why, but also how to get there, how to get that done. We spend a lot of time saying, first and foremost, here are the people that are going to be opposed to this, because they're going to want to know that and they don't want to be surprised by it. But then also, here's what we can do to make it easier for you. We'll talk to these people. We'll bring these people to the room. We'll make these connections for you. The easier you can make it for the decision makers, the easier it's going to be for you as well. And then finally, and most importantly, I always try to hit on this with clients in particular, is what I call know the win, right? You have something out there that's very important, and it might be critical that you get that done, but it might not get done right now. And with all the other things that are going on at the state and federal level, when you get into an advocacy, a path of advocacy for something you're working on, and you get maybe 3/4 of the way there, or even half the way there, and you get a win, you gotta recognize that and say to yourself, okay, well, we were successful there. We might not have gotten all the way to the end, but this is a process, and we're going to build off of this success and then move forward. It's kind of like not negotiating against yourself, right? If you get the win, sometimes it's better to take that step back, reevaluate, and then move on to try to get, ultimately where you're trying to go. So those are the kind of the things I wanted to hit on, Brandon, and then if you want to go, and we can talk after that.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, Greg. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to be here today. Looking out over the room, I can't agree more with Greg that I see a lot of familiar faces and have worked with many of you at one point or another in my career, whether it was as a very, very junior staffer in the office of then State Senator John Kerry, the gentleman here who gave me my start in this whole business. Hi, John, it's good to see you. Hard to believe that it's been 15 years ago when I was answering phones in John's office. But or whether during the part of my career where I was serving as Senator Voinovich's regional rep for this very area, worked with many of you in that role as well. And so it's always great to be in this region. I have an affinity for this region. I had a beautiful drive down from our farm in southern Fairfield County down here this morning. So just great to be here in person and have a chance to talk to you all. So Brandon Kern, I serve as the Senior Director for State and National Policy for the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation. If you're not familiar with the Farm Bureau, we are essentially, think of us as a trade association. We're a member organization, so farmers from across the state pay membership dues to be a part of our organization. And the primary service we provide back, I like to think, is public policy and advocacy representation of the industry. In my role, I manage our government affairs team. So we have a few state lobbyists. I focus primarily on federal lobbying, and we have an active political action committee. So we're involved in a lot of grassroots activity as well. But a diverse career where I've worked both on the community relations side, heavy policy intensive roles, and then on the advocacy side as well. And I think that Greg really brought up a great point in that the thing that we do, what my team does for our members, is provide the big picture, right? And the day-to-day touch points and the understanding of the process, kind of the intricacies of the process, how it works, and kind of connecting the dots for our members. But I think the message that I would share for you that's probably most important for advocacy is those things are very, very important to have that constant presence, particularly in this day and age, and term limits when we have kind of a constant revolving door of new members of the state legislature in particular. You all drive your advocacy platform. And that is based on the personal relationships that you build with your members of the legislature and with your members of Congress. So, the professional advocacy staff, again, our role, keep you informed, help you maneuver the process. But quite frankly, I can go talk to members of the legislature all day long until I'm blue in the face about an advocacy issue. But without my members standing behind me and those members of the legislature knowing that they have to go back home and look my members in the eye and talk to them about these issues, I'm not going to be all that successful. And so I think particularly when you're talking about a trade association, a community organization, or you all as local officials representing your communities, I think I can't stress how important building those personal relationships with your members of the legislature are. We talk a lot to our farmer members and our organization about building those out. And so how do you do that? It's not just going to Columbus, and it's not just going to Washington, D.C. It's great to do that. We do that as an organization. One of our strategies every year is, we have 2 fly-ins into Washington, D.C., and we take about 100 of our Farm Bureau county leaders from across the state to Washington, D.C., and it's strength in numbers, right? And we do the same thing at the state level in the spring every year. We take several hundred members to Columbus to meet with their members of the legislature. And that has a good, visual impact to it, right? Strength in numbers and the kind of the show of force. But I think the other component that's maybe more important than those big events is, show your elected members of the legislature and Congress, your city or your township or the local community that you're representing. Show them the issues firsthand. Invite them to do, tours with you to show them, the infrastructure situation in your community. Those are really where you start to build the true relationships with them, is when you're hosting them at the local level and showing them the issues firsthand so they can see how it impacts their constituents in that area. So, I think probably my biggest word of advice for you all is, again, those personal relationships. Greg mentioned the congressional staff and members of Congress versus state. One of the things that I would point out there, the role that congressional staff have are really important. While staff members at the General Assembly they play an important role. And certainly it varies from member to member. Certain members of the legislature, such as John Kerry, empower their staff to do a lot for them and represent them and be able to speak for them. Other members of the state legislature do not. With the congressional staff across the board, those folks generally are very heavily relied on for input and feedback to those members' work. And so if you're talking about a district director or a regional representative for that congressional office, make sure those folks are invited to your events. Make sure those folks are meeting with you on a regular basis. Make sure that they are well educated on the issues in your community, because they're taking those messages back to their member of Congress for sure. And then their policy staff in their offices. I have regular conversations with those staff members almost on a weekly or every week basis, just providing them updates on the issues that are important to us. And so, if you can build a relationship with the policy staffer within the congressman's district, I think that's a great way to make sure that congressman is hearing your issues and knows, what's important for you all in terms of advocating for your community. So I would really stress the role of the staff at the congressional level is really important. But again, you want to have those members of Congress visit as well. One of the things that we try to do for the members of Congress is really focus on August. So every August, generally Congress as a whole is on a long recess for that entire month, and they take that opportunity to try and travel around their district. So I can remember August recess was always the time that we brought Senator Voinovich, particularly into this part of the state. One of the challenges you all know from a logistics standpoint and a transportation standpoint, not a great way to get a member of Congress in and out of this area if they are going to DC to vote and they have session. So one of the things we did with Senator Voinovich is we did a multi-day tour through the region, and we always targeted that August recess. That way he had plenty of time to come down, stay at Hocking Hills, which he and Janet loved, but travel around and make several spots in the region. And then we weren't so rushed to try and get him in and out. So, for you all living in the Appalachian area, I would really think about, for your members of Congress, think about that August timeframe, because they generally have several weeks there in a row where they're actively looking, and they're having their policy staff come back to the state as well. That's one of the opportunities that a lot of members of Congress like to do, is have their members of their policy staff who work in DC on a daily basis come back and see their district as well. So I had an opportunity this year, as an example. We did 4 or 5, even with the disrupted. And this year they had kind of a disrupted vote schedule. So they were taking more votes in August. Speaker brought them back for some votes they traditionally wouldn't have during that time frame. But we did 4 or 5 farm tours and visits with members of the congressional staff, the policy staff, who flew back and got to see firsthand some of the issues that we were talking about, met with farmers directly, and got to see their farms and their operations. And then they can kind of connect the policy issues that we've been talking to them about all year firsthand. So, if you're looking at the congressional versus the state legislative, think about those things. When can you get those members of Congress and their staff into your communities? And I really think for you all in this region in particular, just because of the challenges with getting them in and out, look at that August recess timeframe to have those visits. So I think that's really important. Greg mentioned something that I'm, completely support him in this. Coalition work is vitally important. We are, at Farm Bureau, we are constantly looking to work through coalitions when we can. And there are exceptions out there. When your issue is kind of one of your primary issues at the top of your priority list, you got to be willing to kind of go it alone and push for that. If you look back a couple of years ago for us, if you know anything about current agricultural use valuation, so that's the methodology that we use to tax farmland property for its agricultural production value versus its market value. That was something we went on our own, right? It was kind of a very agriculture specific issue, but it was the #1 priority issue for our members. Because they were seeing year over year significant increases in those tax rates. And so we went to work to try to make some adjustments to that formula to account for some market situations that were going on. So that's an example of primary issue. We had to go it alone. There wasn't a whole lot of coalition work behind that. It was our members. We were mobilizing them. We were turning them loose, and we were using every tool we had available to us to advocate for that. But in any other circumstance, I'm first and foremost, I'm looking for a coalition to work in. We work a lot, from Ohio Farm Bureau standpoint, as a member of what we call the Big Six. So the Big Six represent all the business groups here, the major business groups in Ohio. So the Chamber of Commerce, NFIB, the retail merchants, the manufacturers, and us, and the Business Roundtable as the 6th. And, we try to, even though our issues are diversified and our platform doesn't always specifically align, and we certainly have different interests, right? Farmers have slightly different interests than maybe some of those larger corporations that are represented by the Business Roundtable. But when we can, we absolutely try to work together and coordinate on our issue platforms throughout the year. So we find a way to work together. And that, again, building that consensus and having that support from all those organizations and all their members helps make it very clear to the legislature that these are important issues. So anytime you can kind of combine those efforts, I would encourage you all, if you're representing cities or townships and counties, where you can, find ways to work together on the issues that are important to you all, because I think that coalition work is significantly important. So I think those are some of the major points that I want to share. So I think we can take questions, or John, I don't know if you have questions for us as we went through, but happy to answer questions.
Good morning, guys, or afternoon, I should say. So you have two really good points in turn. I always think about advocacy and a three-legged stool. So you talked about being present, putting in the time to build the relationship. The worst time you can ask for is to go approach one of your elected officials or a cabinet official is when you need something. So you have, second, you talked about be educated so you could educate. And by that, I think you're talking about knowing what you want, but also perhaps what others may or may not like about your proposal, so you can educate that elected official. The third one I get your feedback on is being a resource. A lot of times, cabinet officials, elected officials, they're approached by people that always want something. And I call it pressure testing that idea to see really if they're getting the straight scoop from you. So even if you're present and you're showing you're educated on issues, allow somebody in that position to come to you as a third party resource. It may not even be your issue. It may not impact you at all, but they come to you as a resource, and obviously then they trust you enough to get your opinion on something that may not be even in your area, but they think that you can actually help them digest or process something. And is that something you would also advocate for?
Yeah, absolutely, Craig. That's a great point. And we whenever we go to new member meetings, we take a list of all of our clients. Those are all publicly available through JLEC anyway. But we make a list, even if we know that we're creating a relationship with that member for a specific reason, because they might be, representing a region that we have clients in, or are on a committee that is important to some of our clients. We'll give them the whole list and say, if you're ever working on any of these issues, and we can be helpful in some way, let us know. And I think it's so important. I mean, we didn't sort of put the fine point on it that you did, to not only show up when you need something, right? That's critically important. And to Brendan's point about doing site visits and seeing folks in their districts, that's the best time to build those relationships and to say, we're not asking for anything. We want you to be aware of what we're doing and why we think our work is important. And that really helps down the road when you actually do need to ask for something.
No, that's a great point, and I couldn't agree more. And I think a lot of that trust comes from, again, just that relationship building standpoint as well. So if you have those strong relationships, I think those members of legislature or Congress think about you and want to come to you as a resource. I've got a great example that happened just recently. Actually, Senator Portman's staff reached out to me, and they had been approached, someone in Congress shopping a bill to create a new, what we call checkoff program. So checkoffs, we have checkoffs in agriculture where you agree to a portion of the sales for your commodity would go towards an independent fund, and that fund then helps with the marketing and promotion of that commodity. So if you're all familiar with the Got Milk campaign or any of the commercials you see, for beef or pork, the other white meat, all those marketing campaigns, those are funded by checkoff programs, right? Where farmers agree to give up a little bit of the money that they would make off that commodity from the sales to go into that marketing campaign. And there was another industry completely unrelated to agriculture who was shopping a bill in Congress to create a checkoff, and they actually reached out to us to say, hey, based on your experience, knowing agriculture has these, what advice would you give us? What should we be looking at in this piece of legislation to think about as we go forward and consider whether the senator would support this? So, and I was absolutely happy to take a few moments to say, yeah, based on our experience here's what our farmers have told us are important about checkoff programs in the past. Here's what they like about them. Here's what they don't like about them. Here's the things that you should make sure he asks about to be included in a proposal like that. And so I think that's vitally important. But again, that's because this particular staffer and I have an ongoing relationship and engagement. We're talking all the time about any number of issues. So I don't think that happens unless she and I have that regular exchange.
By the way, before you think I'm a super spreader, while Brendan was driving down and enjoying the greenery, I was sneezing the whole way. So this is part of my biannual allergy meltdown that I have. I apologize. You don't need
All
a
right,
mic.
Mayor Tom, we'll give him the
You don't
microphone.
need a mic.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on something that Brandon said and share a thought with the group. how important it is to invite elected officials to your community, show them your community, show them what your community needs are. I would expand that beyond just elected officials. And this room is full of people from development district, people from agencies, people from nonprofits that all of those creative partners, if you can invite them and show them your communities and get a whole army of people, looking at what you're doing and what you could do.
I would say, to your point, Mayor, I think this region does it very well. You work through your development districts, you have for a long time. We've been organized through the Appalachian Regional Commission programs and things like that. So this region does a really good job. I mean, you all could probably be kind of a case study in successful coordination and coalition building because you're always talking to each other. But I would just reinforce the importance of that. Visiting each other, hearing about each other's issues, continue to do that, because the more you are on the same page, and again, it comes back to some of that coalition work. Coalitions help drive issues forward. There's no doubt about it. And if you have, a large regional presence, all talking about the same issue, and different members of the legislature are hearing the same talking points from all of you at the same time, it helps drive your issue forward. There's no doubt about it.
I want to say something that Greg picked up on a little bit ago, that there, from this side of it, where we were asking for something that he said, and sometime I think we lose sight of the forest for the trees, and that is on the RTPO money. We when we first started talking to Greg about, hey, we need to try to get something that, the metropolitan areas get an allocation of money for projects. We need something for our area. All we're doing is planning. And I remember we had a meeting, the order group met, and Greg asked me to go to lunch with him. And I went to lunch with him, and he goes, do you have something in writing? Something. And I never have asked Greg this, but I got a feeling he was hearing 6 different stories from the 6 different RTPOs. We had a similar message, but there was probably some inconsistencies in that. So we put together a document, and we used that as our outline to say, this is what we want. We all agree this is what we want. So I would just say, if you're working in groups like that, make sure you've got something. You might think you're all in agreement, but even through conversations, I picked up on some of us saying different things than the others. But on top of that, when it come down to the budget cycle, there was money put into the biennium budget for RTPOs. Well, guess what? It wasn't as much as we asked in our document. We said, we want this much. We got about half of that, maybe just a little more than half of it. And we started making that an issue. So Greg said earlier, he goes, when you get a win, recognize that you got a win. And I think that's what we walked away with. Last biennium, there was $0 for the RTPOs for projects in our region. We have a win this time because there is money. We want more. We want more and it's not for the RTPOs, it's for our communities, it's for you all. So I just thought when he talked about knowing when you won, that was an example. I had to learn that hey, we just won here, whether it was exactly what we wanted, it was a win. So I just want to point that out. Just keep things in perspective.
And John, that took a lot of people to get that done, but Representative Stevens really drove it. And he said specifically, look, this is what we're going to do now, but I want to use this as a lever to talk to my colleagues about building a program around this, making it bigger, building it out, so he had in mind too, the sort of incremental steps that were necessary, to get this done long-term as opposed to just the immediate result. The other thing I'll say about that is, that document lived on its own, right? Because we were trying to talk with members, but he really used that as a guiding document when he was advocating behind closed doors. We talk about this a lot with our members. You have to get, or with our clients, you have to get members of the General Assembly to a point where they can advocate for you when you're not in the room. It's like the opposite of the Hamilton thing, right? You're often not in the room where it happens. And so you have to get information in the hands of those members and make them comfortable advocating as if you were there. Because those things, tend to take on a life of their own. Those documents live on their own, for better or for worse. So, think about what you're putting in writing, but it can be really beneficial to have those things in the members' hands to use.
Yeah, I think John's point about the consistency of that message, making sure everybody, the details matter. I can't tell you how many times as a staff member, I was in the room where some of those decisions are being made, and you've got groups who should be on the same page who aren't in some of those details. And you know what? It's just easy for the policymakers to say, you know what, these groups aren't on the same page. We're not going to try to figure out what side or the other we're going to land on here to make one side happy. We'll slide the whole thing to the side, right? Because that message wasn't consistent. So I think that's a really, really important part.
And with what Brandon just said, this wasn't our first rodeo. 2 bienniums ago, we tried to get money without a document, without a consistent message, and guess what we got? Exactly what Brandon just said. We were pushed to the side and we didn't get it. You will lose sometimes in your advocacy. That's one thing I've learned is you're not going to bat 1,000. You will lose, but keep pushing. Like Greg said too, there's bigger plans for the RTPO from the legislative side. We've got a champion there, but it's just getting in there. So.
Mackenzie, is there a question on the chat? Okay, hold on.
If it's from Chris Slagle, tell him I'm not answering the question.
So we have a question from Mike Zimmer here. He's asking, what role of data collection and analysis for future advocacy before legislature and before departments and agencies, and what approach to data and collection is most useful?
That's a good question. I think this is becoming more and more a part of advocacy for sure. I can speak for us in the agriculture industry, it has become a very big part of what we do, particularly when you're dealing with issues that are, of scientific nature or even economic in nature, right? So as we've dealt with the water quality issue, if you've all followed the issue with algal blooms in Lake Erie and how agriculture approaches that, data collection and how that drives the public policy making process has become very important and a very big part of what we do. So we have partnered with universities and researchers in that area to try and collect as much information as we can about best management practices and things like that agriculture can do to help mitigate that situation. So I think that is becoming increasingly, for us in that type of situation though, where it's very scientific, we have to rely on subject matter experts outside of our organization. So that's part of partnering with groups like, for us, it's Ohio State University and Toledo University, Wright State University. They all have kind of these departments that are focusing on water quality research, and particularly for agricultural land management. So I think that is, an example of how that is absolutely becoming a part of advocacy. And I think we've been able to drive, if you look at the creation of the H2 Ohio program here in Ohio, and the practices that have been identified as a part of that. If you aren't familiar with this is where we've set aside money to make investments in changing farmland management practices that have been identified as best management practices to reduce nutrient runoff from farm fields, which, hopefully will help mitigate the algal blooms in Lake Erie in the future. That is all very data driven, right? It's coming from that research community that we've partnered with. So that's kind of a perspective that I can share from our industry.
Yeah, we kids sometimes don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. But in reality, that's all you can go back on at the end of the day, right? And so if you don't present the facts, or if you present facts that aren't accurate, in my opinion, you're always going to lose at the end of the day. So the more data you can gather and put behind your argument, the better off you're going to be. And I know, we're lucky enough to represent a lot of economic development groups, and you all are really good at data, collection and management and processing. And we use that as much as we can in our advocacy.
Okay, I'm going to ask one final question here to you all, because I'm sitting here thinking as a community leader, these are the folks in the room, right? They're your community leaders. And if there's someone who's just getting started in advocacy or trying to figure this out, how do they identify the best people in their communities to be their partners? What do they look for?
That is a really good question. I would say sort of mutual interests are really important, but not necessarily the same. It's important to have, if you're an economic development organization at the county level, to, partner with a local economic development, and you guys have very similar interests, but then think outside of that box as well. And where are there, maybe the better word is complementary interests, and to try to build those relationships, because, to Brandon's point, I think he said before, if they're hearing the same message from multiple angles and multiple different areas, that's going to resonate a lot more with decision makers than just hearing from the same group of people. I think the presumption is, okay, clearly this is in your best interest. I'm hearing that same thing from everybody here that does the same thing, but how does it affect other people? And so if they hear those other groups saying the same thing or similar things, that's always very helpful.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is when we were looking at members who we want to put forward and have in an advocacy role, one of the things that we look for is folks who do a great job of articulating their story that makes that public policy issue very real to the policymaker. So being able to articulate how this impacts my farm, you take something like estate taxes, something very tax policy, right? It's very dull and gray and quite frankly boring. But then if you have the ability to have someone who could tell that story about how that change in that tax policy is going to change the multi-generational transition. We've had 6 generations of family members who have owned and operated this farm. But if you pass this change of the estate tax, it will stop right there, and literally all this history will be lost, and we'll have to sell some of the farm. So being able to take an issue like that and tell the story of how it impacts your community in a very real way that makes it real to the policymakers, I think is probably something that I would encourage folks to look for.
These guys are there. Great.
Okay, hopefully we learned a tidbit or two in that panel. Okay, we're going to move on to our next session, creative community revitalization. And I'm going to introduce Kathy Zook, another one of our partners with Eastgate, way up north from where we're at today. So she made a nice long 4-hour drive to be with us, and we appreciate her commitment to her constituents. Kathy, I'll let you get us started here.
Thank you. As Misty said, I'm Kathy Zook. I have the privilege of being the program manager for ARC in the Youngstown region. We are the most northern local development district. We're right up there at Lake Erie. Coming on south, that's Ashtabula, Trumbull, and Mahoning County. And yes, it was a 4-hour drive. I'm so glad I left early because, there was a difference with the sunlight. We had to change our clocks back. So I had a chance to enjoy this beautiful facility. So thank you for having me. And I'm really excited to be the moderator of this panel for creative community revitalization. We have 4 excellent panelists. So I'd like to invite them to come on up. And true to form, they have already jointly been working together creatively and put together a joint presentation. So that collaboration will be on display for you. But we have Joyce Barrett. She is our Executive Director of Heritage Ohio. And then to her right is Amanda Terrell. She's our Director of the Ohio History Connection. And then Christy, you did make it. I was a little worried. Thank you. This is Christy Tanner. She is the Regional Director for Jobs Ohio, or pardon me, Manager Director. And then we have Executive Director Donna Collins. She is with us representing the Ohio Arts Council. So we're going to remain seated and give our presentation and then hopefully allow for questions for you at the end. So I'm going to turn it over to the panelists. Thank you.
We're each going to be presenting our resources and programs that we have that you can use. And because they're kind of interrelated, we thought that doing it as a team was the best way to represent to you that use all of us, use all of these resources together. We want you to have sustainable strategies in place. As this money is coming once, we don't want it to be a one and done. So you need to create a system within your community so that it is sustainable into the future. I'm beginning Heritage Ohio's mission is helping people to save the places that matter, build community, live better. Next slide.
As we think about the funds that are available to all of us, I would share with you, I need the mic closer. The mission at the Ohio Arts Council is to fund and provide voice for the arts in the state. And we believe Southeast Ohio is a treasure. Funding opportunities come from general operating support, projects, arts education, artists. And in the last 7 years, we've been working on a program called Fund Every County. When I came to the agency, we were funding 55 to 60 counties in any given year. And it is the Ohio Arts Council, and it's funded for everyone. So we now fund in all 88 counties, and sometimes it's hard to find folks who want to be funded in your county. So if you have an arts group, they should call me always, because we want to be funding the arts in your counties. This year we have an historic budget of $40 million, and that compared to some of the billions of dollars you all have been talking about today makes it feel a little bit small, right? But I can tell you from experience, $1,000, $2,000, or $5,000 grant in a small community becomes a lifeline for someone to have a part-time job or for kids to be served through arts education. So that's really important. And we always, like all of us up here, give thanks to the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the legislature, and arts advocates. All of you who are advocating for arts in schools, funding for arts and culture and tourism, you are advocates that we all need. And so I want to thank you for that. And gosh, I know I've got a little long-winded here. Be patient with me. I also need to let all of you know that our board of 15 is we have 2 representatives in Southeast Ohio, Mayor Tom Johnson and Bill White from Marietta. So your voice is heard at our board table every time we meet. And if you know Tom, like I know Tom, your voice is heard in my phone or messages probably on a daily level. And Misty could probably account for that too. Thank you. Next slide, please.
All right. Just to remind everyone, if you're not familiar with Jobs Ohio, our private nonprofit economic development organization in Ohio, traditionally in the first 8+ years, our organization has focused on the primarily business development, business retention, attraction, and expansion, with the leadership of Governor DeWine, Lieutenant Governor Husted, and our CEO, JP Nassif. Over the last couple of years, we have expanded our scope significantly. We're looking at many different areas. Talent is not the least of one of them, but my focus in particular is on our economic development inclusion strategy, and that is focused around programs and policies to help lift underrepresented populations and underrepresented geographies across the state. So I'm very focused on programs and things that can help support our rural areas of the state and also our urban distressed areas. So one of the things I wanted to share with you is one of the most exciting programs that we have as a part of this, which is what's called our Vibrant Communities program. It is very unlike anything Jobs Ohio has participated in before in terms of support, but it is, as I said, a new program for us, and it really at the heart of it recognizes the importance of community development and having a strong and vibrant downtown and a strong and vibrant community in order to be able to attract and maintain talent to your community, and also businesses within your community, both those that are homegrown and those that want to come and invest in your area. I like to share in the slide that you see is sort of the case study, and the brainchild for part of it is the inspiration that we got from the city of Chillicothe when several years ago, Jobs Ohio participated in funding revitalization of an anchor institution, the Carlisle building, which is in the heart of their downtown, which sat vacant for 12 years. What's exciting about that project is not only did you have an anchor employer in the community coming together and funding partners coming together to bring this building back to life, but they did so in such a way and with a mixed use purpose. So it was a building built for the community, built for jobs and employment for the Adena Health Systems Hospital, and then also built with residential units on the second and third floor. What that did is not only create a beautiful revitalized new historic building in the downtown. It brought people downtown, it brought action downtown, and it prompted those business owners locally to invest in their storefronts and in their facades, and it attracted new businesses into the area. So it's what we like to call the catalytic impact. You had an anchor huge building invest in revitalization, and then you could see the spin-off effect throughout the entire downtown and what happened. And that's really the inspiration for our Vibrant Community Grant Program. And I'll talk a little bit more about the details of it on my next go round.
Next slide. Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Terrell. I'm the director of the State Historic Preservation Office, which is a division of the Ohio History Connection, formerly Ohio Historical Society. And if there's one takeaway that I hope you get today from my words, is that your historic buildings in your communities are assets. And with some planning, they can really be real catalysts for revitalization. Now, my office's mission is to help folks preserve their historic buildings, neighborhoods, and archaeological sites. And that's great, and that's very important, but there's also some real economic benefits to this work as well. And so if you have seen historic preservation at work in your community, then you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen a lot of that work in your community yet, I hope that what I share with you inspires you to incentivize this work to be done in your community. And just know this, historic preservationists have done a lot of research in the past few years to find out who likes historic preservation, who we appeal to. And it's a lot of young people, a lot of millennials and Gen Z really value historic places, and meaningful experiences, unique experiences. And this is where they want to spend their money and their time. So all established communities have something unique and special, and it's, you know, our jobs to work together to help you find those places, identify them, and then incentivize their use and reuse for the better of the community. So passing it back to Joyce.
Heritage Ohio has coordinated the Ohio Main Street program on behalf of the National Main Street Center since 1997. We teach about the comprehensive 4-point approach for downtown revitalization: economic vitality, organization, design, and promotions. All 4 points are coordinated to a community selected transformative strategy. So all of these activities are happening to take you where you want to go. Next slide.
You'll notice when it's my turn, there's just some art on the slide and there's some information about the town. That's for the folks who are visual learners, and you might not want to hear my words. But I thought that was a great way to share with you some of the things that are happening. Like so many of us at this table, and that we've heard at this table today, that how important collaborations are. And I was thinking about naming off a few of them to see if it rings true for you. So Arts Midwest, a 9-state regional arts organization, the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies, Buckeye Hills, the Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. I always have to say Mayor Johnson, because he's the key collaborator usually when people come together in Southeast Ohio from my staff's experience. The Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission, the Department of Education, the Civil Rights Commission,
And we have a newer collaboration called the AIR Institute. So it's just like it sounds, AIR. And it really is about business and government leaders coming together with creatives for strategies of working together for a community. So business folks learn how to work with creatives, and creatives learn from business folks that there needs to be a plan, there needs to be money, and there needs to be projects that the community agrees on. So it's a workforce development opportunity as well. We have folks that we've been training in Nelsonville, Athens, Zanesville, Marietta, and then some other, we've started a new teacher cohort that covers several urban spaces in the state. But if any of you are interested in learning about the AIR Institute, you can see some of Misty's staff who have been trained or talk to me about that. But we'd love to bring the program to your town and really train folks how to facilitate those conversations. And it's miraculous what happens. Sometimes the project becomes a farmer's market, or the arts are introduced as part of a festival, whereas it was only, maybe it was a car show or something. But the idea is the community's coming together, and it's low risk. They're coming together around a project that can change the way things happen or how people engage with each other. And it's not about raising money or taking money just from the business folks at the table, but their ideas are equal to the creatives' ideas, and they learn from each other. And I'm happy to talk with folks afterwards more about the AIR Institute, because I think it has something for everyone.
Just thinking about some of the comments, I can't agree more that where we see examples of catalytic kinds of projects coming together in communities, it's really driven by the collaboration of the partners in that community, and it's really driven by the youth in those communities. I have witnessed in a lot of our towns, especially here in southern and southeastern Ohio, is that you have people that have moved away and then they're moving back into the community, and they want to do something. They want to do something to give back, and they want to take action. So they're getting into leadership roles, and they're making things happen in their downtowns. And I love to see that kind of energy, because that's really what drives a lot of this change, and especially when they, when they're working with Joyce and Heritage Ohio on the Main Streets program. The program I mentioned, the Jobs Ohio Vibrant Communities program, again, it's new. Last year was our first year for the program. We invested $6 million this past year, awarded 5 different communities with grants of up to $1.5 million last year. I'll share a couple of those examples in a little bit. We felt like there was such a huge demand. We had over 40 communities go through the pre-application process. And then of those 40 communities, 20 of them moved forward with a full proposal. We were only able to award 5. So our leadership has been gracious enough to allow us to extend that program and expand the availability of it. So we're taking it up to 10 million this year. We have available applications are open now. And if you're interested, you can reach out to your Jobs Ohio network partner to talk with them about eligibility and applying. And in here, of course, it would be Ohio Southeast.
Right. So my office administers a number of programs to help folks and communities preserve the places that matter to them. And a couple of them are the National Register of Historic Places. And the National Register are places that are worthy of preservation, and it makes these places eligible for grants and tax credits for revitalization. So a couple of recent examples in this area, Caldwell and Coshocton are newly formed National Register districts in their downtown. We also have the Certified Local Government Program, and the certified part in air quotes means that you have a certified local historic preservation program. And this means that you are working actively to preserve certain districts in your local area. They're eligible for grants from my office, and a few of these places in this region: Portsmouth, Somerset, Zanesville, Mount Pleasant. And then we have the last but not least, historic tax credits for rehabilitation, restoration. And this is a state tax credit and a federal tax credit that you get as an income tax credit for rehabilitating a historic building that's listed in the National Register. So that's one of the ways the program builds on other programs. So 25% of your rehabilitation costs on your state credit can go back to you, and 20% of your federal costs, for a combined 45% of your rehabilitation costs can go back to a developer, a community, or a taxpayer for rehabilitating a historic building. So that is a very, very beneficial number. And it's so beneficial. Ohio does some of the most business in the whole country on tax credits. I have some more details to share with you about jobs created and revitalization numbers on my next slide.
So Main Street is an economic redevelopment strategy that was created in the 1980s based entirely on historic preservation, taking advantage of what you have. It's not like you're going to start over. So take what you have and make it work. For success on a certified Main Street program, you need professional management. It doesn't happen by itself. Continuing education, tracking economic statistics, going back to the data collection that was brought up on the last panel. And we do an annual evaluation based on a certified accreditation for the National Main Street Center. Next slide.
So when I was thinking about what names you might recognize in this region of the state, I thought about Joyce Barrett and Heritage Ohio, of course, because she's a great conduit, not only for the work that she specifically does for the mission of her organization, but she's a great arts advocate too, and we appreciate her so much. I was thinking about the funding in all 88 counties, and wanted just to list off to you some of the folks I could do from memory. I'm old, so this is not by any chance a full list. But we fund Heritage Ohio, the Ohio History Connection, Stewart's Opera House, Passion Works, the Southern Ohio Museum, the Southeast Ohio Educational Service Center, the Somerset Artist Co-op, many historical societies across the state, but specifically in this region, Buckeye Hills Regional Council, arts programs at your universities and colleges in the region, the Dairy Barn Arts Center, the Zanesville Museum of Art. Lots of schools have teaching artist residencies, the People's Bank Theater in Marietta. So if you think that I'm missing something, when you go back home, call that arts folks and say, call the Ohio Arts Council. Donna Collins didn't say your name in the list. I want to make sure you're getting funding. So we have general operating support. We have project support. We have a Teach Arts Ohio program that is a no match grant so that artists, professional artists, can come to schools and work with arts educators. We also have the Big Yellow School Bus. When our theaters are fully back open and kids can take field trips again, we cover that cost so that it's not coming out of the school board's budget. And we have an individual artist program. And we think we have something for every one of your communities. Please don't leave the money on the table. Next slide, please.
I thought I'd share some of the projects coming out of the first round of the Vibrant Communities program, and there's some interesting lessons learned, I think, in each of them. This happens to be in Sandusky, Ohio. It's the former, they called it the, I can't pronounce it, Hogrif building. It was a historical building, couldn't be saved. In this case, had to be brought down. So, but the developers that are doing this project are rebuilding it in the same archaeological spirit and design of the original building for that particular downtown. And part of what made this a good project in our first round, it was an $8.8 million project. About 30,000 square foot building in the heart of their downtown. It's a really strong mixed use. They have a law firm that's serving as their anchor tenant. Something very different about this program as well is that we're recognizing not just traditional jobs created in the targeted industries that Jobs Ohio focuses on, but we're looking at this in a much more broad perspective, especially because most of these are downtown projects. So we're looking at jobs that are created that are serving the community, which we typically wouldn't recognize. But in this case, it was a law firm. In other cases, it's an insurance agency or whatever it might be. And that's the office jobs that are being created on the second floor of the building, and then retail on the first floor. So it'll be a nice mixed use and conjoined well with the surrounding properties. So.
Next slide. There we go. So I want to talk a little bit more about historic tax credits, and I want to mention a few communities that have utilized them in this region. My list is Nelsonville, right here in Nelsonville, Athens, Marietta, Cambridge, and Somerset. And we administer this program in conjunction with the Ohio Department of Development. So here's some data. Now, it needs to be updated for 2021, so it's actually going to be better than what I share with you. I have data from 2007 to 2020 for the state historic tax credit for revitalization. 449 buildings have been rehabbed in 53 communities. So it's not just the 3 Cs, it's all over Ohio, totaling $6.5 billion with a B in investments in 13 years. So not too shabby. Jobs created. Now this is Ohio Department of Development numbers. I think it's pretty good data, but it's their numbers. Permanent jobs in these 13 years, 76,000 permanent jobs created because of those building rehabs, and 41,000 construction jobs. So right now we have, where's my new list? We have a lot more going on right now. Like the pandemic did not really slow things down. In fact, it sped things up. So in our current round that began in August of this year, 63 buildings right now, and I have to mention this is a competitive credit. So not all these buildings are going to get this credit. 63 buildings are competing for tax credits totaling $1 billion, $1,017 million. So that means that that's private investment. Folks want to invest $1 billion in these buildings in 19 communities right now. So just think about that number in existing infrastructure. That's a huge deal. It's a huge thing for communities. And it's a really important program that the state does. So we're proud of those numbers. Next slide.
Economic vitality is one of those 4 points. First, you support local businesses through retention and expansion. You support local entrepreneurial growth. You provide education tools and incentives for building a strong business economy. Then you recruit new businesses, but not until you've established a strong central core in your downtown. And I'm always telling people, you know, sometimes they want to invest out in the office park and things like that. If your core is rotten like an apple, you're not going to recruit new doctors. You're not going to recruit new industry. They drive right through the center of town and they know whether you've got things going on or not. So we want the economic vitality to be the primary focus of what you're revitalizing in your downtown. Next slide.
Well, I think that I'd like to talk about data for a minute. So I love the advocates who gave their answers to some of your questions about the importance of data. I would share with all of you that the Ohio Arts Council, the Ohio Alliance for Arts Education, and the Ohio Department of Education have partnered with Quadrant Research to do data about all of our schools. The dashboard can be found on my website, and that'll be at the end. I'll get that to you at the end. But you can drill down the data to what's happening for arts education in every school in the state. You can compare yourself to a neighboring school. You can compare districts, and you can look at so much information that helps you write grant applications if you're thinking about schools and education. And that information is so helpful. We can all talk really well about the stories and the impact of arts education because we see it with our children. But oftentimes funders want data. And so we provide that year over year data as well, so you can see changes. I think right now, this past year, there are about 24,000 kids in Ohio who don't get arts education through their schools. And you might go, well, that's not a very big number compared to how many kids are in the state, right? well it is if it's your kid who's not getting arts education. So we'd like to get that number down to 0 so that everybody's having a creative opportunity to learn in and through the arts. Another some data I'd like to share with you is last year in November, the state through Governor DeWine, the Lieutenant Governor and legislature, the arts were given $20 million. And that went out in operating support to our large, mid-sized, and small organizations across the state. Also last year, the National Endowment for the Arts gave the Ohio Arts Council $500,000 to add to our pool of distribution. And this year, in fiscal year 22, the National Endowment for the Arts sent ARPA money to us at nearly $1 million. So we're doing what everybody else in this room is doing, is trying to use this collection of money to do all that we can to support what's happening in schools. And as Joyce always talks about, is the sustainability of that. What is it we can do now that will have an impact well after the money is gone? And that's our goal with those federal dollars, to help do everything we can to move forward. Next slide, please.
I think Joyce is when she talks about economic vitality and that being first and foremost, I couldn't agree more. And that's the same way that from the economic development inclusion strategy, we're looking at it. You have to focus on that economic vitality, and it starts in the core of the city, wherever it is. And in order to be able to do that, there's a few critical things that you have to have. First is you have to have a plan and a vision. So that you know where you want to go and how you want to get there. You have to have public-private partnership. Everybody has to be on board, not just the city leadership, but the private sector businesses as well, and the downtown business owners and the citizens ultimately need to be behind it and supportive. And I think you made the point that you have to build. You can't. Don't try to create somebody that you're not. What makes all of our towns and locations unique is the history that we have behind them. So build on those strengths and play off of those unique aspects of what we have, because ultimately that's what makes it attractive to visitors and to businesses that want to invest in that particular community. The slide that's up here now is interesting, and Van Wert was another awardee of the Vibrant Community Grant Program in the first round. And their project was very unique because they had all of those components that they've been working on executing now for over a couple of years. And their project, in fact, is led by the foundation. The Van Wert Foundation in that community has been slowly in the process of re-envisioning their historic district in their downtown, and they have acquired 48 buildings now in their downtown, and they're getting ready to undertake their first phase of the renovations with 12 buildings. But it's a massive undertaking, and it's a very unique. I think there'll be a national model by the time they're finished with this, but it's just one approach. Others take it one building at a time, but make sure that you've got everybody at the table.
I'm not trying to kill you with data, but I have a little bit more because I think I want you to understand that small communities can do this work too, the historic preservation tax credit work. In smaller towns below 70,000 people, projects completed to date using the state historic tax credit, 97 projects awarded, 134. Tax credits for those completed, 117 million in tax credits. Awarded is 161 million thus far. And total project costs for these projects in these small towns, 721 million for the completed projects and 1,008 million for projects completed. So again, in small towns, we're talking about $1 billion worth of investment in historic buildings. So that's very impressive. Way to go, Ohio. But remember that this requires some planning and some foresight, and usually partnerships if you're a local government. And so as all this money that we're talking about flows into your community, I urge you to not look too quickly past your historic buildings. Like, there's going to be an emphasis on building new and removing blight, but I'm giving you lots of examples here about how people, you don't have to do that. You can reuse the buildings that you have. You can leverage lots of different sources of funding. You can leverage lots of different partners, public and private money. And you can keep what makes your community special and unique and different and really gives it that sense of place. So next slide.
Design is one of the 4 points of Main Street, and this is a great example of where we coordinate with our partnering organizations, with Donna, with Arts Council, and more with historic tax credits. But design is about improving the public and private spaces in your downtown. It includes flower programs, parking management, wayfinding, historic building maintenance, and rehabilitation, using the appropriate technologies and learning about all of the incentives available. Next slide.
So as we're thinking about coming out of the pandemic, is anybody thinking about ever coming out of the pandemic? Yes. Well, we've been surveying our grantees since January, once a quarter. And it's not the hard scientific data that we've been talking a little bit with Amanda, but it's how are things going? How is your staff feeling? Are you feeling encouraged? Are you feeling like the sky is still falling? And what we have seen over these 3 quarters of the calendar year of 21 is that people continue to feel good. They feel like they're coming out of it. But what I realized is as they're coming out, it's because they did so much work in the first year of the pandemic. They were preparing their sites. They were educating their staff. They were creating more opportunities. And they were able to keep their staff employed if they were eligible for PPP funds. And they took advantage of everything they learned from their mayor, their city council folks, right up into Columbus to their legislators. And so what we're seeing, or what arts organizations are telling us, is that they're rehiring their professional staff if they had to lay them off. They're telling us that they are engaging artists again. They're also sharing with us they're back to the business of having shows and concerts and exhibitions. And that means they're hiring electricians and lighting folks. They're having graphic designers do the programs and the ads and so forth. And that means when people show up in the parking lot, there's that added value of the arts. So we're paying someone who may be collecting a fee for parking. Maybe the restaurants are busier than they have been. And so it is a domino effect, right? When the arts do well, when your communities do well, others in other fields also succeed. And at the Arts Council, we feel really good. You know, you always want to be going up and to the right when you're looking at the chart. And so I appreciated some of the information Misty had to share and others about the funding and as it's going out and the federal funding being able to be spent through some parts of it through 2026, because that's what keeps me up at night. The sustainability and what happens if we have another peak or if somebody has to close down or any of those things that probably all of us are worrying about at night. But together we're getting through it. And I think that the folks who lead your arts organizations are really rock stars. They're doing more than they've ever done and they're figuring it out. And they're also finding new ways of doing business. It's amazing how many people aren't really ordering paper anymore. And how many folks have decided that they're going to purge that file room that had nothing but files of paper, and now they have a new office to hire someone else, or they have a space to have a meeting instead of having to go down the street and borrow somebody else's meeting room. So I think we're in a good place. We can do better, but we've learned a lot, and I appreciate what I've learned from the arts leaders in our state. Next slide, please.
So I think COVID has really heightened the awareness and need for places where people can work collaboratively in co-working spaces or shared office spaces, especially in this region of the state where broadband connectivity is a challenge, to say the least. And a lot of people have trouble from home trying to do that. So one of the other types of projects that are eligible for the Vibrant Communities program is these types of co-working locations or facilities. And that's exactly what Coshocton Collaborative is going to be. It is a fantastic project that was also one of the awardees in our first round of the program, and really looking forward. I know that they're pursuing EDA funding for the balance of that, and looking forward to seeing that facility once it's up and running.
My office also administers the Ohio History Fund grants. Now, these are small, as Donna mentioned. They seem like peanuts compared to the billions we're talking about, but they are important, and they're for history projects. So please check our website to apply for those. And also Heritage Ohio and my office recently received 2 National Park Service grants to create a sub-grant program to re-grant dollars back out for historic building rehabs for bricks and mortar projects, which is pretty rare. The last round we got just recently was $750,000 to re-grant out to the 5 Main Street programs in Appalachia. So Cambridge, Coshocton, Marietta, Millersburg, and Portsmouth. And so we're hoping those communities will apply for these re-grant funds and do some great revitalization projects in their downtowns. Next slide.
Promotions. This is the one you probably all thought I was talking about to begin with. Main Street isn't just the party committee, but it's one element of making a successful Main Street happen. First, the promotions committee helps create an identity for downtown so that you all know what to expect or have an idea of what that location really entails, what its identity is. Second, it creates retail promotions. Those are specifically designed to ring cash registers. Third, it creates special events. That's retraining the habits of people to come to your downtown and make an opportunity for them to connect with the community. All of these activities under the promotion are still coordinated with your transformative strategy so that you are actually moving the ball forward. Next slide.
I just have 2 little data points to share with you for this slide. The arts in Ohio, 290,000 full-time jobs, $41 billion of impact through the arts. And there's scientifically reviewed data to back that up. So think about jobs and impact. That's what the arts bring to your community. Next slide.
So just like the power grants that we were talking about this morning, the Vibrant Community Program has a planning component as well for communities that are interested in pursuing the grant, but not quite there yet. They have a vision and a plan, but getting to execution, there are a few steps missing. So maybe it's due diligence on a building or help with determining what the capital stack might be for the project. For those communities that aren't ready, there is a planning grant, $20,000 typically up to that amount to help move a project forward. We have some in the works now, and the hope is that eventually they'll be able to come in and apply for the grant, the Vibrant Communities Grant Program in the future.
Next slide. Organization is responsible for community outreach, partnerships and volunteers, partnerships with everybody in the community. Funding, we have a lot of maxims in the Main Street world. Everyone asks, how am I going to find the funding? 1/3 from private sources, 1/3 from public sources, 1/3 from earned income, and it isn't that hard. Next slide.
That means we have to hurry, I can tell from Joyce's voice. Throughout our conversation today, we know the arts and the creative gifts of the people here in Appalachia are making a huge impact in our culture and our day-to-day lives, and how our children see the space where they live and where they might decide to stay or go away. And the arts and tourism and culture have a big part to play in that. Next slide.
Actually, I'm going to jump in for a moment. Panelists, the information you have given us is just really wonderful, but I want to give our audience the time to post some questions. So at this time, I'd like to open it up to anyone who would like to ask our panelists a question. Please feel free. Okay. Oh, I thought, did you have a question? Did you have your hand up?
As I understand it, the Senate has a bill to raise the tax credit from 25 to 35%. And maybe you should give us the numbers of those so we can contact our local official. Also, being from Greenfield, Ohio, we just got our designation as being historical downtown. Greenfield is that correct?
Greenfield?
And we had-
Possibly. I can check for you.
Okay, I think we did. And also the picture you had of Highland County was Hillsborough. I don't think they do have the historical downtown, but we do. It's also the home of Johnny Paycheck. So,
I love that competition on historic, who has the most historic downtown. Keep it up.
but I do think it's important we do back the 35% tax credit.
The Senate Bill 225 is proposed. They have, I don't know, their third hearing in Senate Finance Committee tomorrow to change the tax credit to 35% for communities under 70,000. Fingers crossed that bill will go through the Senate smoothly and then it has to go through the House. So best case scenario is it would pass by the end of the year. It's not law yet.
And the amount of tax credits available will be doubled for 2 years. So it's going to be great.
To 120 million.
Yes.
Could you anyone speak to the process of historic tax credit applications and also getting historic designations? Because my understanding in both cases is they're rather complex and you often need outside consultants to help you do that, which most of us can't afford.
There are grants to help you get National Register nomination through Ohio Department of Development and through Ohio History Fund and Certified Local Government. So it is a process. It's possible to do it for local communities to do it or private residents, but it's a little difficult. It's complicated. So you have to get National Register listing for either a building or a district. And then that makes you eligible for the state and federal tax credits. And there's applications for all this, and they're all on our website, and my staff is available to help talk you through everything.
In general, what is the time frame?
A National Register nomination for a district for downtown will probably take 6 months to 9 months because you have to prepare all the documentation, the history, identify the buildings that are contributing, that are eligible for those benefits, and then it has to go through our state review board and then go to the National Park Service for final listing. It's not quick. That's why planning is important. So thinking ahead and getting your time frame done and doing things in advance is really important.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and it comes from the online chat. It's from Mike Zimmer, and it's, are opportunity zones helpful to this discussion about creative community revitalization, and if so, how?
Question one more time, I'm sorry.
Are opportunity zones helpful to this discussion about creative community revitalization? If so, how?
Are there opportunities to discuss more about creative?
Opportunity zones.
Oh, opportunity zones. I would go back to, don't the regional economic development offices are the ones leading sort of that opportunity zone, as well as the Department of Development has a great website for how a community can post their projects, as well as how investors can shop for projects, but they should contact their regional development office.
And in the spirit of staying on time, I'd like to thank our panelists. So thank you very much for having
me. One last comment, Appalachia Heritage Luncheon at the State House, December 8th. You can find the invitation on Eventbrite.
Thank you all. I really appreciate that. Okay, we are at our final panel today, and I really appreciate everybody sticking around here till the end. This is a good one. We're going to look at the Capitol bill, and it's my pleasure to bring up Jeanette. And Jeanette, I can never say your last name, so. Okay, I'm going to try it. Worsbicky. Hey, pretty good, huh? So Jeanette is with the Ohio Mideastern Governors Association, Omega, and we are very pleased to have you join us today.
Thank you, Amista. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I know it's been a long day, but we have one final panelist today. I I always used to say to folks when I'm in, especially over Zoom, that Omega's region, our 10 counties, are the most beautiful in the state. And Misty, I have to say, I may have to rephrase that slightly because the drive down here was absolutely spectacular. But I did get to go on the Y Bridge in Zanesville, which is awesome. So you guys have to check that out. So we heard a lot this afternoon and this morning about tools to redevelop your communities. And it's absolutely true. This is unprecedented time. We have a chance to really change the future of the Appalachian region and to do it in an informed, planned manner. So our last panelist today will talk about another tool in our tool bag, and that is money from the state capital budget program. I think a lot of what our vibrant community panel talked about today would lend itself very nicely to maybe some state capital budget projects. So with that, I would like to introduce Jeff Westhoven, who is the Chief of Program Services at the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission.
Thank you. And I understand that Representative Edwards was scheduled to be here, but he fell ill today. So it's a panel of one. And I have to congratulate our panel last time for all of you not practicing that all together. All four of you were very seamless. So very well done. I don't expect similar coordination issues now with mine. But what you'll hear, I think, is consistent with a lot of what you've heard earlier about vibrant communities, using these projects as catalysts in your communities. This is essentially using the state capital bill as a tool for cultural facilities. And for many of you, you're aware the state capital bill is the main way that we fund construction for the state. The capital bill has really four main areas: K-12 schools, state agencies, which could include parks, prisons, office buildings. Also, higher education is the third one, so your community colleges, universities. And then the fourth area of the capital bill are community projects. And within community projects, there's also different segments. One of those segments is the cultural facilities, which is what our agency does. So the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission is made up of what used to be the state, the School Facilities Commission, the State Architect's Office, and the Cultural Facilities Commission, all merged together in 2012, 2013. So that's the organization that these projects would be assigned to when they get into the capital bill. If I go back just one slide, those pictures before, so that's the, let's see, Packard Music Hall from Warren up above. I think that's Majestic Theater in Chillicothe in the middle, and then Delaware Arts Castle in Delaware, all projects that are funded through this mechanism in the capital bill. We can go ahead. So I wanted to give just background on this program, and many of you may be thinking, I have a project in mind. Would it be eligible for this mechanism in the capital bill? So we'll talk about that. And if you do have a project, what the cycle would be. Okay. Now, I mentioned that we have part of the community projects. Another mechanism in the capital bill is if you have a parks project, those typically go through the Department of Natural Resources. That is also part of community projects. Some of you may have a partnership with a higher education facility. Those are also in the capital bill under the higher education part. And so some of those, you may have a joint use agreement, if you've heard of this term, a joint use agreement with some of the local community colleges to do those projects. Those are all different mechanisms of doing community projects, but the ones that we would administer, again, are the cultural ones. Just to give you a sense of scale, I think in the last capital bill, it was about 150 million or so in community projects. Of those, 78 million was in the section that we administer, which is the cultural side. So these projects are, these are grants. When a project gets appropriated in the capital bill, this is important, that means it's potentially eligible for grant funding. The mechanism of getting a project in the capital bill is through your legislator, right? Through your state legislator. You probably know this. We heard on the lunchtime panel, relationships with your legislators are important. Same is true here. That's ultimately how these projects get in there. But for a project to get in the capital bill, you want to know what area it fits in. And I think one of the other presentations was the homework that you need to do to make sure that you are eligible. And so we will talk about what elements should be in place to make that kind of a winning proposal. Once something's in the capital bill, it essentially reserves spending authority. That means that the state is allowed to spend money on that. It means it's just for that project. That project will actually be named either by your organization or by a project name. It can't be transferred to anybody else. And so it's different than like a pool of funds that eventually get competitively awarded. Once it's in the capital bill and it has your name on it, it can't be used for anything else unless it gets legislatively transferred. Okay. Okay, we go to the next one. Okay, so who can receive a grant? So it can be either government organization or an Ohio nonprofit or regional arts or cultural district. So most of the organizations, as I understand here, could be eligible for funding through this mechanism as an organization. Okay. The types of projects that qualify. Okay, so these are your, this is actually out of a definition revised code. It has to be a project that supports culture. And culture is defined as either arts, science, or history. So we think of arts as being like a cinema, theater, those types of things. Science could be like a COSI, science museum. Zoos also fall into that category. Historical buildings. We just heard about the Ohio Historic Preservation Office. Those types of buildings that are on a national or local historic register could be eligible for this type of funding. So if you have a project in mind and you know you're an eligible organization, you have a project that kind of fits this, then we go to the next slide about what type of expenditures are eligible. These grants that we have they're reimbursement only. And so that means that the organization will expend funds, then over the course of the project will be paid back. And so the types of things that are reimbursed are essentially construction. So it'd be design, it'd be trades work, materials. These projects by law are actually prevailing wage. So the prevailing wages have to be paid on these projects. It can pay for land acquisition or acquisition of property. That's eligible as well. And in general, things that this is for renovation, not repair. That's probably an important distinction that we often hear. The money that we are using is 10-year bond money. And so typically the life of the improvement has to be greater than the 10 years. That's one of the conditions. So any of those expenditures are eligible for the grant funds. Okay. And the types of things that are not okay. So again, since this is a reimbursement type grant program, we don't do advance payments. So it's as work gets completed, the organization would submit invoices to us and we would pay the share of that. Again, it has to be renovations and not repairs. And so types of things that would be repairs, patching a roof would not be eligible, but a new roof would. Again, think of something with a very long life. And that's actually just a condition of the bonds, the tax exempt bonds that we have. That's what bond counsel has defined as an eligible expenditure. Typically, administrative expenses, like if you have an architect agreement, those are eligible. But for example, salaries of local officials that are working on the project that would not be eligible as a reimbursement, or things that are operational in nature, like a maintenance contract. So we went through kind of things that are eligible, things that are not. Okay, matching funds. So in this particular program, the state matches 2 to 1. So there has to be at least one local dollar for every 2 state dollars. Okay. And examples of things that would be considered local funds, pledges, other non-state grants, cash, of course, endowment funds. In-kind contributions are allowed as a local expense. And then also, I think this was mentioned earlier in one of the presentations, the value of property, if you own it, is considered matching. So if, for example, you own a building and the value of it is $200,000, you can use up to $200,000 in local match. So that could match, for example, a $100,000 state grant. I'm sorry, you could match a $400,000 state grant with $200,000 local. So that is eligible as a local match. Other things for these projects is that before a grant agreement is signed, the project has to be fully funded. which means that let's say locally you define it as $1 million project, and let's say it's $500,000 state money. We would need to see that the whole $1 million was raised so the project could be completed. And so that's something that is part of a grant agreement. Also sustainability. This sometimes happens with small organizations where let's say the financials are not as strong as normally you'd see. The state looks at this just as you would as a citizen investing in something. And we are essentially making a deal where we're putting in construction money in return for 10 years of providing culture to the state. And so that's the agreement that we'll sign, construction money in return for culture for the state for 10 years. And so one of the things we look for is the organization stable enough to be around for 10 years? Typically, this is not a concern, but sometimes we do ask for additional credit enhancements to show that, and that's part of the grant agreement. Also, as you'd expect with any construction, you'd want to make sure that the property is insured. So if something happens during construction, the state's investment is covered. Okay. Project steps. Okay, so let's say your project gets in the capital bill, which is the big step. After that, essentially the organization applies to OFCC for the grant. And that's when we ask for the supplemental information we just talked about. There's an agreement that the organization signs with the state for 10 years. And then the project goes back to the legislature in the form of the controlling board. This is something that sometimes folks aren't aware of. We do not have a full-time legislature in the state. If Representative Edwards were here, he'd say we're always working full-time for you. But it's not in session all year round. And so since the legislature is not in session, when it appropriates funds, you always have to come back to the legislature and show that you have spent it consistent with the legislative intent, okay? If the legislature is not in session, then there has to be a body there that will approve that. And that for the state of Ohio is the state controlling board. The controlling board is made up of three senators, 3 representatives, and a president appointed by the governor through the director of OBM. Every 2 weeks or so they meet and they approve the capital requests. So really anything that goes through the capital bill as a appropriation comes back to the controlling board for the release of funds. The controlling board will make sure that it was, again, spent consistent with the intent. The same is true with these projects. They go back to the controlling board and the director of budget management will sign off on it. After that, we sign contracts. You can go on to construction, then we go through the reimbursement. In some cases, projects actually start before the agreement is signed. We can go back, I think it's at least 12 months for things that were previously done according to bonds. So it is possible to do work that has already been completed. And then after construction is complete, then the only requirement is that the facility remain open and operable for 10 years. And that's really the project cycle. In terms of reimbursement, sometimes this comes up. State pays these through electronic fund transfer, and so money's transferred electronically. We pay during the course of construction. And an example here is, let's say we had a $500,000 project budget, which is pretty typical for one we have, and $200,000 was a state grant. During the course of construction, we would pay that fraction all the way through to the end. So in other words, the state wouldn't pay $200,000 at the beginning or $200,000 at the end. We would pay along the way until the final payment. At the final payment, then the project has to be open and operable and providing culture to the state. That's the cycle. All right. Now there are people in our office that are way smarter than me on this. So they're the actual grants administrators, and they have they can answer a lot of questions on the details of it, but I'd be happy to take any questions you'd have, particularly if you have any projects that you're thinking of now. Now's a great time. I know that for state agencies, we just submitted our capital request to budget management on Friday. And I believe every state agency had the same schedule. So that's all the projects that we have internally. Those will go to the Office of Budget Management. And probably by January, February is when we will hear, what portion of those are going to be submitted in the capital bill. Some of you may have more information than I do on the size of the capital bill. That's always one of the questions, like how big will it be? And what portion will be higher ed? What portion will be schools, what portion will be community projects. We don't have that information, but I'm sure it'll be coming out eventually. So,
Any
Right.
questions for Jeff?
yes.
Thank you for the presentation. I must say that what I've just heard is kind of completely unknown to me. Until now, all I knew was that we were supposed to hand something into our state representative for whatever we wanted, but I've never heard any background or structure or process to this before, nor had I ever been told that this is all about cultural facilities. So I'm just sort of processing everything you've given us. But since you asked, could a community swimming pool ever be approved for something like this?
So question on community swimming pool, those would typically be in the parks side of it. So if you had a project like that, that would probably be routed through Department of Natural Resources. And so again, your legislator would probably know better which avenue to take. But that sounds like it fits closer to that definition of a parks and recreation than it would be in cultural.
Okay. And what about municipal facilities or public safety facilities?
Those likely would not be cultural, but again, they might be in a different area of community projects. And there are other projects you haven't talked about that do make their way into the capital bill as community projects. So as long as the General Assembly decides that that's something they want to fund in that section, they're able to do so.
Okay.
And I imagine if our state representatives were here, there's a lot of negotiating going on right now, probably with those projects.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to hear the backbone of all of this. I appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
Jeff, first of all, well, you do have a question on the chat and I'll get to that in a second, but it sounds like what you're telling people is the first step is really to have the conversation with your state legislator. This is my idea.
Right.
How do we go about that? Okay. I just want
Right.
to clarify for everybody. Okay. So we do have a question from the mayor of Lisbon, and they are working on submitting a multi-use community center, which would entail some cultural events. Is there a specific target they should keep in mind? And target meaning the percentage of community center events that would be cultural?
Good question. So if there's an element of like theater or a community presentation, that can be part of the project. Sometimes we can define the project as a subset of the whole thing. So let's say there was a big community center, but there was a part that was just the theater or the community space. And that could be separately accounted for. It makes it easier to define that as the project and fund just that part. And so it can be. What they would essentially show is they were supporting culture to the public, so giving presentations, theater, shows, that sort of thing.
Jeff, just to kind of build upon what Mr. was saying about contacting your legislator about a potential project. Do you know, is there a specific deadline or does each legislator sets their own deadline for getting that request?
That's a great question. I think different areas of the state do it differently. I know that Johan, our legislative liaisons here too, and I know that like some of the urban areas will actually have a process where they submit it to somebody that is designated by the legislator, and they have a kind of vetting process to decide what to submit on behalf of the region. I'm not sure if that's how it happens here. That's always been kind of the mysterious part from us. What we see is when the capital bill comes out, we read it and we say, oh, we got to sign 160 projects. It's like Christmas morning. We open it up and there they are. And we start talking to people. But each area does it differently. But again, talking to your local legislator is always going to be the path, and to see what they can do for you.
We did try that a few years ago, and I think the feedback that we obtained was that our legislators would rather work with their communities one-on-one. Is there another question?
Yeah, I have one. So for the historical aspect of like cultural stuff, when it comes to the Capitol bill, like could projects that townships and villages do like potentially be as small as like just historical preservation of like town documents?
Preservation of documents?
Yes.
It typically would have to be construction. So it could be, for example, an archived area. And right now, in fact, for the Ohio History Connection, we're doing it's a larger capital project, but for historical, like storage of information. Size-wise, it can be as small as $5,000. On up to 20 million is the range. Now, typically, most of the projects are in the $100,000 to $1 million range. Typically, but they can be small.
Any other questions for Jeff?
How much money is in the current capital?
You know, I was thinking it was around $150 million. That was my recollection. And of that 78 million, that's House Bill 529, I think, from the 132nd General Assembly. 78 million was community or cultural.
All right. Thank you very much,
All right,
Jeff.
thank you.
Okay, thanks again, Jeff. I appreciate that, and Jeanette. Okay, so just to summarize today, everybody that decided to stay till 2 o'clock. First of all, I think I heard today, pick up your phone and call people to ask questions and ask questions and ask questions and ask questions. Okay. Number 2, we heard think regionally. Don't just confine yourself to your small community. Think regionally, think of bigger impact. And also build relationships. I think everybody in this room probably is really good at building relationships, but I'm going to challenge you to work at it a little bit harder. And more importantly, build relationships with your legislators so you can get things done next year and the year after. Okay. I hope everybody really enjoyed this day. I am just really thrilled that everybody came out and made this trip to Nelsonville to join us. We did not know what we were going to expect to see, but we're thrilled because I think everybody's anxious to get out and see each other and have conversations. And we hope to maybe do a little bit more of this going into the future. We'll see what it does. I see thumbs up. So Mayor Fraunfelter is all go for this. We'll give me a week or two to rest, then we'll go at it again. But okay, so on your way out the door, I'm going to remind you of 2 things. The PowerPoints, I guess, are not quite all on the website. I said that this morning and I apologize, but they will be on the website shortly. So you'll be able to access all those materials that were there very soon. And on your way out the door, we do recycle our name badges. So we appreciate if you drop those in the little basket on your way out. And thank you. Have a safe drive home.